dream was always to get my own place ever since I was in high school. I really couldn't wait to move out because I hated my dad growing up and my mom wasn't much better. We would always buck heads and my dad would always be drunk on the weekends, and honestly it was just a mess. As I got older and girls obviously became a factor, it became even more of a problem because there was no way I'd bring any girls back to that household. So because of all of this, I took the first chance I could get and moved out when I was 19 in college. I didn't go away to school. I went to a commuter college not far from home. My parents wouldn't pay for me to go away to school. So I was on Zillow, Facebook, and Craigslist every day for a while, and when I finally found a rental that looked promising and affordable, I went to see it right away. The layout is pretty important, so I'll describe it now. As I walked in, I was welcomed with the living room / dining room area, which was one open space. Then there was the kitchen adjacent to that, which was separated by a wall. Then, to get to the single bedroom in the apartment, you went down the hallway, which also had 2 closets. One which I used as a pantry and one as a storage closet, and then the door to the bathroom. At the end of the hall was the bedroom. The bedroom was generously sized. It fit a queen-sized bed easily. It had 2 more closets, and I fit a couple of dressers and a TV in there easily. I was sold immediately, especially because it was budget-friendly. I moved in the next month, and life was fine. Fast forward a few months maybe. I went out with friends in town, and we ran into some girls we knew. I ended up taking this girl home that I'd known for a while through school, but we'd never hung out in that way. I'll just call her Sammy. We ended up drinking at my place and watching a movie, but that was really all we did. She didn't want to take it further than that on our first time hanging out, and I respected that. We ended up in the bedroom finishing the movie that we started in the living room, and I think we both just passed out from being drunk somewhere through the movie. The next thing that happened was I woke up to footsteps outside in the hallway. It was still the middle of the night. I looked to my side, and I was alone in the bed. I jumped out of bed looking down the hallway, and I saw Sammy in the living room grabbing her stuff off the couch, but she was doing so quietly. She was trying to leave now to avoid the awkwardness in the morning, and I understood that. So I didn't say anything and went back to bed quietly. I heard her eventually walk out the front door. For good measure, I called out, "Sammy?" to no response, and that confirmed she was gone. I got comfortable in bed relatively quickly and drifted back off to sleep. It was probably another hour that passed when I woke to something loud. I immediately shot up in my bed and my heart started pounding relatively quickly. I called out, "Sammy?" again. There was no response. I was honestly kind of scared to get up and check, so I picked up my phone and texted Sammy's number asking if she was still in my house. I realized that was a little weird to do, but I was actually scared in that moment. I looked at the door, which was still open because I was too lazy to get up and shut it after Sammy left. I was definitely still a little drunk from the shots we were taking in the living room, but I felt like I saw something wrapped around the door frame. My breathing only intensified. I still can't believe I had the balls to do this, but I swiped down on my iPhone to reveal the control panel thing, and I pressed the flashlight button. And with the phone still pointed at the door frame, I realized there were 2 hands wrapped around the door frame. But as if responding immediately to being revealed, whoever's hands they were tightened and then pulled back out of sight, and the scream I was holding in for those 3 seconds finally came out. Mixed with simply screams of dread, I also screamed, get out," over and over. By the time I finally got up, I looked down the hallway, and it looked empty. I flipped on the light immediately. After a few minutes of calming my breathing and just trying to listen for sounds, I built up the courage to check the hallway closets and bathroom, and they were clear. I then moved to the main living area, and trust me, there weren't any places to hide in there. I held my phone as if it were a gun as I crept to the nearest light switch and turned it on. I felt instantly better when the living space was lit up, but there was still the kitchen. I crept to the opening that led to the kitchen and flicked that light on as well, finally lighting up the entire apartment. There was no one here. I looked behind the couch, I looked under the tables, I even checked the floor-level kitchen cabinets. When I realized it was clear, I ran to the front door to lock it. The weird thing, though, was that I never heard the front door close, and yet There was not a single soul except for me in there. I now tried calling Sammy repeatedly until she picked up. When she did, she sounded tired and confused. I asked her if she was just in my house, and she told me she left a while ago because she couldn't sleep. I didn't explain. I just told her my bad. I thought I heard a noise, and then we hung up. I decided to spam call my best friend until he picked up, also sounding tired and confused. I explained everything that just went down, and he said he could tell I was still drunk. His explanation calmed me down, though. He said I was sleep-deprived and still drunk, and I had a mid-wake-up hallucination. It made a little sense, actually, considering I never heard the front door shut. I eventually could laugh it off and apologized for waking him up. I went back to my room, shut and locked the door, and I actually calmed myself down enough to fall asleep. The next morning, I did another search around the apartment, and it was without a doubt clear. So I went on with my day. But at some point, I thought back to that supposed hallucination I had of those hands wrapped around the doorframe the night before. I walked to my room and examined the doorframe, and I think my heart stopped for a moment when I saw obvious fingerprints left in the exact positions the hands I saw on the doorframe had been. I felt dizzy, coming to the realization that it wasn't a hallucination. I took this picture of it, which I still have in my iCloud years later. I resorted to calling my dad for advice, and he more or less called me a buffoon for not locking the door, but as long as nothing was stolen and no one was there anymore, take it as a valuable learning lesson. Honestly, nothing my dad said on that phone call was untrue. That's what sucks. I don't know who the hell came into my apartment that night, and I don't know why they chose to do the literal creepiest thing they could have possibly done. But after my year-long lease was up, I moved on and upgraded apartments and never looked back.
So tasty, it could make Poseidon switch to a spoon. Wholly divine taste from the Greek gods.
At Grand Canyon University, we believe in equal opportunity, and the American dream starts with purpose. By honoring your sacred vocation in technology, you impact your family, your friends.
My parents' house never really felt like a parent's house. Not in the normal way, at least. My dad traveled for work constantly, and my mom was always out with friends or staying over my aunt's house, or doing something else where she'd come home late or not at all. I know that sounds kind of messed up, but it was just the reality. It wasn't like they abandoned me or anything. It was more like they were always busy and always somewhere else. So from the time I was like 16 and up, I basically lived alone. I ate dinner alone most nights, I watched TV alone, I'd be the only person in the house for an entire weekend sometimes. I'm an only child, and I think that's because my parents realized after having me how much they valued their own freedom. So in that regard, I did suffer, which is something I feel more now as an adult. When I was younger, I used to love it because it felt like freedom having such a big place to myself. I could do whatever I wanted without my parents breathing down my neck, and I didn't have to share it with siblings. I could bring friends over and play games late. I could talk to girls on the phone without being embarrassed. It felt like having my own home without paying for it. And even when I turned 19 and started going to a nearby college, nothing changed. If anything, it got even more like that. My mom and dad were gone or out more, and I was basically just holding it down at home. I knew every noise that house made too. That part matters because it wasn't one of those houses where every creak freaked you out. It was an older but larger house, and it had its usual sounds. I always just said the damn place had character. So this happened on a night where I knew for a fact I was going to be alone. My dad was out of town for work, and my mom had been talking all week about how she was staying at my aunt's because they were having some big family thing the next day, and she didn't want to drive back late. I remember her telling me, "It's just you tonight," and I honestly didn't even care. That was normal. I told her that she didn't even have to tell me that. I made food, I watched TV, I did the usual. At around 11, I went upstairs to my room and started watching YouTube videos in bed, something I do some nights for hours. My room was at the end of the hallway upstairs. At the top of the stairs, you'd have a small landing, and then to the right was my parents' room, and further down the hallway was the bathroom, the linen closet, and then my room at the end. I had my door open because my parents told me to keep doors open at night, more as a staying alert and listening for intruders type of thing. But I also liked hearing the house a little, like background noise. It made the whole being alone thing feel less intense. I eventually started getting tired, so I shut my laptop and just laid there scrolling on my phone. So I'm gonna just say that probably an hour passed from the moment I shut my laptop to when my phone rang. It said no caller ID on the screen. That was the first time I'd ever received a no caller ID phone call. I stared at it for a second. To be receiving that late at night was sketchy as hell. I ignored it, but it rang again right after, still saying no caller ID. That's what made me answer. I figured if it was someone important, they would call twice. Plus, it's just a phone call. Worst case scenario, I hang up. So I picked up, and at first, there was no noise. I got nervous that it was one of those scam calls that calls to see if a number is active to add it to some call center database. But then I started hearing something faint, and it took my brain a second to process what it even was. It sounded like a TV playing in the background, and what was weird was that I could also faintly hear my own TV downstairs through the door, because earlier I guess I left it on in the living room. I didn't have it on loud, just on low volume as background noise, so hearing TV audio on the phone instantly made my stomach tighten. I said hello a second time, to once again no response, just the TV sound, like whoever was on the other end wasn't even trying to speak. It was just there. Then I realized something that made me sit up in bed instantly. The TV noise I was hearing through the phone wasn't random. It matched my TV downstairs, like perfectly. It wasn't delayed. It was the exact same audio at the exact same moments, like it was synced. That's when I got this cold feeling down my spine, because there's only one way that makes sense. That would mean whoever was on the phone could hear my TV in real time, as in, they were inside my house downstairs. I tried to force a normal explanation, like it was a friend standing outside one of my windows downstairs trying to trick me, or maybe the call was somehow glitching and picking up on my microphone audio. That can happen, but the more I listened, the more I realized that didn't make sense. It sounded like someone was calling me while standing somewhere in my living room. I got up and walked to my bedroom door and listened. And oh yeah, I was 1,000,000% sure now that the audio on the phone was syncing to the TV. In hindsight, this was dumb, but I screamed out, "Who's down there?" because in the back of my mind, I thought for sure I knew it was a friend or family member pulling something. And then, the line went dead. They hung up. By this point, my mouth went completely dry. I couldn't even call the number back because it was an anonymous call. I walked out into the hallway towards the stairs, and I looked down. I still heard the TV on in the living room, and then a creak. It sounded like the wood floor cracking from the pressure of a person, but if that didn't confirm things, the moment I heard someone clearing their throat downstairs, that's when everything instantly became 10 times more real. I could no longer lean on the glitching phone theory, even though deep down I already knew that was BS anyway. I went to my room and quietly closed and locked the door. What if my dad was testing me, seeing how I'd react in a home intrusion situation, or maybe my Uncle T? So I called my dad, but he didn't pick up. He may have already been asleep. It was like 11:30, so I called again and again, but no luck. I tried my luck with Uncle T, and he picked up on the second ring. I could tell he was in bed. He asked why I was calling, and I prefaced the phone call telling him this might sound crazy, and then dropped the bomb and asked if he was downstairs. I remember vividly his exact response and tone as he said, "Steve, what the hell are you talking about?" When I elaborated, he told me that's definitely something his brother would do, his brother aka my dad. While we were on the phone, my phone started vibrating. I looked at the screen, and it was the no caller ID on the screen again. I begged my Uncle T to stay on the line real quick. I was putting him on hold as I picked up. He said okay, so I picked up the other call. As I said hello, there was the same silence. This time, I didn't hear the TV sounds on the other end. What did that mean? It seemed they had the phone on speaker because I could hear their footsteps. They were moving, and the footsteps were matching the footsteps I suddenly started hearing outside of my bedroom. I prayed with all my heart this was my dad messing with me. Then, my doorknob jiggled, whoever was on the other side tried pushing the door. Thank God it was an old, heavy door with an old, heavy lock. The sound still synced with what I was hearing on the phone. Whoever was on the other side of the door knocked. I had the sudden thought to merge the two calls, and when I did, I yelled into the phone for my Uncle T, saying, "It's not my dad, get here now." I also yelled that whoever was in the house was also on the phone with us. My uncle seemed to wake up from this, and he started yelling into the phone things like, "I'm coming, you cocksucker." The no-caller ID caller hung up the phone, and I heard footsteps move away from the door. This all but confirmed it was in fact not my dad. My uncle told me to stay in the bedroom. He was on his way. I wasn't a little kid, but I wasn't some big brolic man either. I was some skinny 19-year-old. My uncle knew I was in danger. He started heading over to the house. We lived in the same town at the time, but that 7 minutes he took to get to the house was the longest 5 years I'd ever experienced. I heard the familiar voice of my uncle screaming downstairs finally, so I rushed out of the room and downstairs. Having him there made everything feel better. We called the cops together while searching around the house for stolen items. The TV in the living room was still on. Before the cops got to the house, we found the kitchen window to be fully open enough for someone to crawl through. That info was of course relayed to the police, who, when they got there, did what I imagined to be a standard police search of the premises, asking us to lead them around the house, but from behind them. We cleared the whole house, and whoever was in there initially was no longer there. After the cops were done, they asked to see the no-caller ID calls in my recent calls. I showed them, and one of the officers told us that even though it says no-caller ID, sometimes they can still request records and trace it from where it came. They said it could take a few days, but they'd get back to us. My uncle stayed over that night, which made me feel safer. We kept every light on like little kids. A few days later, one of the officers called me back surprisingly. The number was traced back to someone I actually knew. It was an old acquaintance from high school. Not a friend or enemy, but someone who had my number and address and such. I hadn't seen him in years. The cops asked if I wanted to come with them while they questioned him, so my uncle and I went since he was there on the scene with me originally. When the guy's dad answered the door and saw the police, he instantly called his son down without question, and I could see it in his son's face that he was nervous. The officer and I asked him straight up if he made those calls. He immediately said no. Then he said his phone had been stolen a few days ago. He claimed he lost it at a party and never got it back. The cop asked why he didn't report it stolen. He just shrugged it off and said he was going to get a new one anyway. The cop told him they'd follow up if needed, and that was basically it. His dad just stood there the whole time watching, but he weirdly didn't say anything. There was no big gotcha moment or arrest or anything. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The nervous look on his face when he came to the door. Was it a look of guilt, or a natural look anyone would have when being greeted with police on your front doorstep? If it really was a stolen phone, that means someone stole his phone specifically to call me and break into my parents' house. And that's without a doubt scarier than if it was him.
Are you craving warm, creamy, cheesy comfort this week? Grocery Outlet, your extreme value headquarters, has you
It was a weekend like so many before. The usual crew was getting ready to meet up at Cody's house to pregame and go out. This was post-college. We were all 23 to 24 at the time. Cody's house was often the spot to pre- and post-game simply because he had a cool basement where his parents couldn't hear us, but also because his parents were chill. It was just the four of us going out to some local bars tonight: Cody, Randy, Jake, and I. When all four of us were there, we decided on who was calling the Uber, and once we did, we were out of there. Fast forward a few hours at a bunch of dive bars and then a dance bar, and eventually Cody and I decided to go home. We were tired. Randy and Jake were staying out later. Cody called the Uber back, I think, and he offered me the pull-out couch in the basement when we got to his place. He came downstairs with me to help me set it up, and while down there, we played a game of Madden. Honestly, I've always sucked at Madden, so he destroyed me and I didn't want to play again. I was tired and just wanted to sleep the alcohol off before I made the inevitable hangover even worse. Cody went upstairs and shut the door, and I was left alone in the darkness. The only thing that kept that basement from being complete and total blackness were the lights from the cable box clock under the TV, the actual standby light of the TV itself, and a slight green glow from a Heineken mini fridge on the other side of the basement. That mini fridge would also provide some weirdly relaxing white noise that would help me fall asleep. So things faded to black as I knocked out like a baby. A drunk baby. I woke up and it was still dark. I didn't know what time it was, but I knew it was still late at night, or super early, whatever you want to call 3 or 4 a.m. My mouth was so cotton-mouthed dry I could actually barely move my mouth. I stupidly didn't think to bring down a bottle or a glass of water before going to sleep. After drinking all that alcohol, it was no wonder I woke up. I just really didn't want to get up though. It's a very familiar and relatable conflicting feeling that anyone who's woken up hungover and thirsty has felt. I tried to ignore it at first. I rolled over to get a look at the Heineken fridge to see if anything was in there, but it was just alcohol. And then, for whatever reason, my eyes darted to the other corner of the room. I felt like my eyes were playing tricks on me at first, but I could swear I was looking at a black mass in the corner of the room. A black mass that I didn't remember seeing there ever before. I tried to wait for my eyes to adjust better to the dark, expecting the black mass to be some coat on a coat rack or something. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it was moving. It was a person. The amount of restraint I had to not scream was insane. I didn't think it was Cody just based on the sheer height of the mass alone. Without panicking, I had to figure out how to get out of there. After a tense couple of minutes, I sat up and fake yawned as if I was stretching, pretending I didn't notice that person in the corner. I then started fake talking to myself, like muttering complaints about not bringing water down here. Anything to give the appearance that I was oblivious and just going to get water, not run away and alert anyone. I got up and walked closer to the stairs, but also closer to the figure in the corner. And perhaps the most tense moment of my life was when I turned to the right to get to the stairs, and I hoped I wasn't grabbed. When I started going up the stairs, I didn't run or anything. I took it slow and normal to not draw suspicion. But when I was about halfway up, I took a curious glance down the stairs, and that black mass was now at the bottom of the stairs, and I can confirm it was a person. I almost tripped as I started to run up the rest of the stairs and slam the basement door shut. I then started running up the stairs to the upper level of the house to Cody's room, where I shook him awake and yelled at him that there's someone in the basement and that he needs to wake up his dad. And during that commotion, I heard a slam from downstairs. And I yelled, "See?" Cody got up, and we went to his parents' room where we woke up his dad, and I told him there's someone in the basement. He got right out of bed without asking questions and ran down both flights of stairs to the basement, noting that the basement door was wide open. And when I mentioned I shut the basement door, Cody's dad yelled at Cody to call the cops, and he did. We also noticed the back door to the house was now open. So when the three of us were done looking through the basement, we all went to the backyard to search, then the front yard, and then the neighboring yards, all while Cody was still describing what was going on to the 911 operator. I'd say we were searching for 15 minutes before the police finally arrived. And then they did their full search and formally wrote up a report for the incident. By the end of it, there were some neighbors waking up and coming outside asking if everything was okay. By that point, I was sobered up, terrified, and wanted to go home. So as soon as the cops left, I went inside to talk with them for a bit, then I said goodbye and called an Uber home, refusing Cody's offer to drive me home. I worried for them a bit that night, but I was not sleeping in that basement after that. In fact, I never did again. We'd still have pre-games and stuff there, but the feeling in that basement changed for a while after that night, where I'd always glance at that corner of the basement and just think back to that night. That black mass.
Over the years, I've realized that fall hits the camping sweet spot. No mosquitoes, no high-pitched cicadas, just cool air, crunchy leaves underfoot, and the kind of silence you can't buy. That October, I had a few days off work, so I loaded up the truck with my usual kit: tent, stove, cooler, chair, and the little things I tell myself I'll never forget but always double-check anyway, like the headlamp batteries and my Mora knife. I wasn't out to prove anything. Just a solo weekend, me and the woods. I had a spot marked from spring, a small flat clearing about a mile down a rutted forest road. Just big enough for one tent and a fire ring someone had left behind years ago. Not a formal site, but not exactly hidden either. The kind of place you're glad to find empty. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute. A crow barked somewhere far off. Otherwise, it was just the kind of quiet you drive hours for. I've done it so many times, I could do setup with my eyes closed at this point. Tent first. Rainfly pitched tight because mountain weather changes its mind when it wants to. Bear line prepped with a rock tied on, food hung high. Stove and cooler staged on the tailgate. Chair unfolded by the ring. I tuned my beat-up AM/FM radio until a blues guitar cut through the static and let it play while I stacked wood. By the time the rye-bie hissed in the cast-iron pan, the sun had slipped behind the ridge, and the whole clearing was lit with the warm glow of fire and sunset working together. That first night in camp is always my favorite. Everything's still clean. Everything smells like wood smoke and promise. I leaned back in the chair with bourbon in hand and let the fire do its thing. That's when I heard voices up the trail. They weren't being wild, just laughing. Two beams bobbed between the trunks, weaving closer.
Granger knows that as an HVAC technician, the heat is on you every day. Your first call? An office building with a noisy AC unit. Time to put your experience to...
A couple stepped into the firelight like they belonged there. Early 30s, maybe. She wore a beanie and a puffy jacket, sipping something steaming from a mug. He had a neatly trimmed beard, a fleece with a park patch sewn on, and the kind of easy grin people practice for group photos. "Evening," he said. "Mind if we borrow some heat?" I waved them in. "Fire's not on the payroll." They laughed and stepped closer. They introduced themselves, Jake and Alana, and pointed downhill where I could barely make out a blue tent shape through the trees. We did the usual camp talk, where we'd come in, which overlook was worth the detour. She teased me for camping alone. I told them a buddy was running late. That was half truth, half insurance. They were friendly, almost too friendly. We traded sips, my bourbon for their cheap wine, and talked about trails. For the most part, it was fine, normal even. But every so often, I caught Jake's headlamp beam looking at my gear. Not curious exactly, more like inventory. After a while, I excused myself to grab something from the truck. When I came back, I reached for my knife on the chopping block where I'd left it. Empty. I checked the ground, the fire ring, the chair. Nothing. That knife had an orange handle, designed so you could spot it in leaf litter. And it wasn't anywhere. "You lose something?" Alana asked. "My knife," I said. "I'm always misplacing it." Jake crouched, moved some bark with his boot. "Didn't see you set it down." I let it go, though every instinct told me I hadn't misplaced a thing. That knife doesn't walk off. They said goodnight not long after, headlamps bobbing back toward the blue tent. Their laughter faded into the trees, and for a long while the woods felt heavier than before. I poured water on the fire until it hissed, locked the bourbon away, and told myself to sleep light. Around 9:30, I heard them again. Laughter, footsteps getting closer. Their beams washed across my camp and stopped at the edge of the clearing. "Hey," Alana said, "we found something weird down by the creek. You should come check it out." "What kind of weird?" I asked. "Like someone built a structure," Jake said. "It's just a couple minutes away." "Sounds cool," I said, even though something felt off. "But I've got an early start, rain check for the morning." They stayed around just a little longer than made sense. Then Jake laughed, shook his head. "Fair. We'll tell you about it instead." "Or bring it to you," Alana teased. Their lights drifted away, laughter burning a little too hot for the joke. When it finally faded, I slid my chair so I had a clear line to the trail. I set my keys in my pocket and went inside the tent. Sleep came in fits. 20 minutes down, 5 up, listening. At some point in the night, I heard a stick snapping just outside camp, definitely heavier than a raccoon. And then came the zipper. My tent door opened just a few inches, and I could see a shape crouching in the shadows. Then something glinted in the dim light. It was my knife. The guy's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through me. "You should have come with us." I stayed completely still, pretending to be asleep, though every muscle in me screamed to run. My phone was in my sleeping bag, and I inched my hand toward it, praying they wouldn't notice. The woman giggled and said, "He looks peaceful, doesn't he?" The knife lingered at the opening of the tent for what felt like forever, then pulled back. I heard the zipper close. More whispering, then footsteps crunching through leaves as they walked away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat there in my bag, clutching my phone like it was the only light in the dark. Every snap outside a jolt straight to my chest. By dawn, I walked down to their site. Empty, tents gone. No trash, no char in the fire ring, no sign they'd ever been there except 2 flat ovals in the grass where their shelters had pressed down. I packed everything as fast as I could and hiked straight back to the ranger station without stopping. I told the ranger what had happened. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he said, "We've had other reports over the past year. They move around a lot." That was it. No closure, no chase, no real answers. Just the knowledge that I'd crossed paths with people others had already warned about.
With Ashley's next-gen Nuvella Performance fabric, you can relax. These pieces are easy to clean, and some styles feature machine-washable covers. Discover next-gen Nuvella at Ashley.
Only Faulkner Nissan has all-wheel drive SUVs for just $269 a month. That's right. Upgrade to a new Nissan Kicks all-wheel drive, only $269 a month. Lease an all-wheel drive Rogue, only $330 a month. Or get a new 4-wheel.
I left the forest that morning and haven't been back to that part since. And to this day, I can still see that faint glint of my own knife hovering in the dark, just inches from my face. I've always been more of an indoors guy. I work IT contracts, servers, routers, troubleshooting when someone locks themselves out of their own account. That kind of thing. But I grew up in upstate New York, and even if I've spent the last 20 years mostly behind a keyboard, there's still a part of me that feels at home in the woods. When my son Ben turned 8, I promised him a proper camping trip. Just the two of us. I wanted him to have the kind of memory that sticks. The kind where you can smell the pine and hear the brook when you think back on it years later. My wife teased me that I was trying to prove I was still rugged, but really it was about time together. No screens, no Wi-Fi, just marshmallows, stars, and his endless questions about the universe. We picked the Lake George Wilderness. Not the touristy boardwalk part where families rent paddle boats, but the deeper stretch of forest where the trail signs are just weather-worn planks nailed into trees. I wanted something simple. A few miles in, set up camp, roast dinner, and let the kid fall asleep to the sound of the brook. The hike was short, easy enough for his kid legs, but long enough to feel like we'd gone somewhere. We only passed one couple on their way out, trekking poles in hand. They told us a site by the stream was open. By the time we found it, the sun had already tilted low. The clearing was just big enough for a tent and a fire ring, with a log perfect for sitting. The brook gurgled 20 steps away, with little sparks of light dancing across it under the branches. Setting up with an 8-year-old isn't fast, but it's thorough. He staked corners, tested the headlamp until I made him stop cycling the strobe, and announced that our bear bag was a pantry on a rope. Dinner was mac and cheese from a pouch, and hot dogs roasted until the ends split like cartoon hot dogs. We burned one marshmallow on purpose because that's tradition, Dad. The night slipped into that deep Adirondack stillness, where sound carries far, but nothing makes it. Our fire died down to glowing teeth. When we finally zipped into the tent, Ben asked if satellites were stars with jobs. I told him they were, and he fell asleep mid-sentence, with his small hand curled under his cheek. I woke before dawn. Light was gray, still weak. I rolled over and blinked at the fire ring. A man was sitting on the log. He wasn't rummaging through our stuff. He wasn't creeping. He sat with his hands folded, watching the tent like we'd invited him. He looked older, 60, maybe more. Wool cap, jacket that might have once been part of a suit. His face was clean and he was smiling. Not wide, not menacing, just smiling. What I noticed more than his expression was what wasn't there. No pack, no water bottle, no flashlight, no tent pitched nearby. Nothing that explained why he was sitting calmly at our dead fire at dawn. Ben slept on. I didn't move for a long moment. Instinct said stillness was smarter than noise. Finally, I said, "Morning." Then he spoke. I just wanted to see what kind of people would sleep with their backs to the trail. And that's all he said. He looked past me, toward the back of the tent where our spines had been all night. He wasn't wrong. The trail ran behind us. Our heads faced the brook, our backs exposed. I wanted to ask a dozen things. Who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you here? But every question felt like giving him too much. Instead, I said, "Didn't hear you come in." He nodded once, like that was the right answer. Then he stood, brushed his pants with both palms, and walked uphill into the trees. Not toward the trail, not toward anything marked. He didn't look back, didn't hesitate, just walked until the forest swallowed him. I sat frozen until birds started calling. Ben woke up a few minutes later, hair mashed on one side, asking if it was pancake time. He squinted at the log and said, "Was someone here?" "Just a hiker passing through," I told him. He grinned. "Like a ninja?" "Something like that," I said. We ate oatmeal, filtered water, did a short day hike, but my eyes kept drifting back to the log, to the trail, to the spot where the man had sat without invitation.
The 2026 Chevy Equinox is ready for your daily drives, weekend getaways, and everything in between. Plenty of cargo space, plus a big touchscreen that keeps all your tech right where you need it. It's more than an SUV. It's your Equinox. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive.
When we packed up, I angled the tent a different way before I collapsed it. Door facing the trail, not away. Silly maybe, but it mattered. Back at home, Ben told my wife we'd camped with a ninja who showed up in the morning. She laughed. I didn't correct him. I've told the story a handful of times since. Always trimmed down, made to sound like a weird wilderness encounter. But the truth is, it unsettled me in ways I can't explain. I never heard him approach. He carried nothing. And he sat there smiling like he'd been waiting for us to wake up. It's been over a year now, and I still angle my tent differently. I'd been traveling solo for almost a year when this happened, and by then, camping alone didn't scare me. If anything, I loved it. The independence, the stillness, the way you could wake up with the trees and feel like the world belonged to you for a few hours before anyone else showed up. My friends thought I was crazy for doing solo road trips with nothing but a tent, a pack, and my little car. But I liked the feeling of being self-sufficient. It was October 2022, the perfect time to head into the Ozark National Forest. The weather had cooled off just enough to make hiking comfortable, and the bugs weren't nearly as bad. I figured I'd spend 3 or 4 nights there, just hiking, journaling, and giving myself a break from the noise of my phone and everyone's opinions. I parked at one of the smaller trailheads. Nothing official. Just a dirt turnout with a wooden sign almost swallowed by vines. I hiked slow, taking pictures of the trailside mushrooms, pausing at overlooks where the trees rolled out like a painted quilt, and stopping at a little creek to refill my bottles. By late afternoon, I found my spot, a flat clearing ringed by tall oaks with a faint old fire circle made of stones. Perfect. After I made a fire, leaned back against my pack, and just sat there watching sparks climb into the canopy. It felt safe. It always does at first. That night, just before the fire burned to coals, I noticed movement down the trail. At first, I thought it was deer, the way shapes moved between the trees. But then 3 figures emerged, a group of campers, 2 men and a woman. They weren't close enough for me to make out details, just the outlines of packs against the dusky sky. I gave them a little wave. Standard trail etiquette. You acknowledge, you make it clear you're friendly. But they didn't wave back. They just walked past me, turned slightly off the trail into a flat area maybe 100 feet from my camp, and set their packs down. "Guess I've got neighbors," I muttered, half amused, half annoyed. I'd picked that clearing because it felt tucked away, but the forest doesn't belong to anyone. Sharing space was part of the deal. I waited for the usual sounds, tent poles clicking together, a stove firing up, maybe even some laughter or a guitar if I got unlucky. But nothing came. No voices, no lights, just stillness. I figured maybe they were stealth campers, people who sleep without tents or fires to blend in with the woods. Not illegal, just unusual. But the thing about stealth campers is they usually go farther off trail, not set up within shouting distance of someone else. That night, lying in my tent, I could see a faint orange glow from my fire's last embers. Past that, the woods were pitch black. And beyond that, I knew, were 3 people sitting silently in the dark. I told myself not to worry. People camp how they want to camp, but it took me a long time to fall asleep. The next morning, I woke to sunlight slanting through the tent. I unzipped the door, stretched, and checked the other side. They were there, sitting again. No fire, no stove, no smoke, no voices. I forced myself to call out a casual morning. They didn't answer. The woman's head turned slightly, just enough to show she'd heard me. Then she turned back toward the trees. I busied myself with my coffee, pretending it didn't bother me. But the silence clung to me all morning. By the second night, the unease was heavier. I cooked dinner, ate by the fire, brushed my teeth, and zipped into my tent early, just to get away from the thought of them. I lay there, headlamp dimmed, listening. Every so often, I'd hear what might have been a footstep. But the forest has a way of playing tricks. Branches fall, squirrels skitter. Still, I kept imagining them sitting out there in the dark, awake, watching. I barely slept. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving a day early. I didn't care if it meant hiking longer than planned. I needed out. I packed my gear quickly, rolling my bag, stuffing the tent, cinching straps. I was just hoisting my pack when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. The 3 figures had stood up. They didn't speak. They didn't shoulder packs. They just rose in unison and turned toward the trail. So did I. I walked at a steady pace, not rushing but not dawdling either. Their footsteps echoed faintly behind mine, not closing the distance, not fading, just following. Every hair on my body felt alert. Half a mile down, the trail split. One wide path continuing straight, and a narrower side path veering into the rocks. I knew that side path. It was rough, but it looped back toward the road. I made a snap decision and cut onto it, ducking between cedar trees. The trio didn't follow, but I didn't trust that. I found a little pocket among rocks and brush, crouched down and waited. Minutes passed. Then I heard them. Footsteps on the main trail. They didn't speak. They didn't call out. But as they passed the side path, one of them turned their head, directly toward where I was hiding. My lungs locked up. The figure paused, listening, before moving on. The 3 of them kept walking until the sounds faded into nothing. I stayed hidden for nearly an hour before daring to move. When I finally stepped back onto the trail, the woods felt empty again. Just birds, just wind. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead, and even then, I kept checking over my shoulder. My car looked like a lifeline in the gravel lot. I drove straight to town, shaking so hard my hands left little damp prints on the steering wheel. I never saw them again. I reported it to a ranger station, but without names, details, or crimes, there wasn't much they could do. Probably just odd hikers, the ranger said, though even he looked unsettled. 3 people. No fire, no light, no voices. Just quiet. And that quiet followed me down the trail like a shadow that didn't belong. To this day, I avoid camping near others. Noise can be irritating, but silence, I learned, can be far worse. I consider myself a pretty easygoing camper. Nothing hardcore. I'm not one of those ultralight folks who hike 30 miles with everything packed into a bag the size of a shoebox. I'm a weekend guy. A cooler full of food, a tent big enough to stand in, and maybe a paperback I'll never finish because I end up just staring at the fire. It's how I reset after a week of spreadsheets and deadlines. That's exactly what I had in mind one Friday in May of 2022. Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina is one of my favorite spots. Big enough that you can get away from people, but not so remote that you can't bail out if something goes wrong. I left the office early, beat the traffic out of Asheville, and was bouncing down a gravel forest road by late afternoon. My gear was in the back of the car: tent, sleeping bag, cooler, stove. Simple stuff. The site I found wasn't fancy, just a flat clearing with a fire ring made of blackened stones and enough space to pull my car off the road. Perfect. The late sun was sliding through the trees, and I remember thinking how much better this was than sitting in a bar or wasting the evening on Netflix. I set up the tent, unrolled the pad, stashed the food in the cooler, and made myself a quick dinner on the stove. Rice and chicken I'd cooked at home, still warm in foil. By the time I finished eating, dusk was settling in. The woods had that layered sound I love: birds winding down, bugs winding up, a stream gurgling somewhere beyond the trees. I was leaning back in my camp chair, deciding if I wanted to bother with a fire, when I saw headlights. A truck slowed on the road and then stopped right beside my sight. 2 men climbed out. Mid-30s, maybe 40s. Both in ball caps and hoodies, jeans dusty like they'd been walking around outside all day. Nothing unusual about them, except for the way they walked straight toward me without hesitation, like they already owned the place. "Evening," I called, standing up automatically.
You're 10 minutes late for work, but you were 20 minutes late yesterday. It's a good day for a good deal at Outback Steakhouse. Get down under favorites like the Aussie 3-Course.
"Evening," the taller one said. He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you give a stranger. It was thinner, like he was about to tell me something I wouldn't like. "This is our site," he said. I blinked at him. "Your site? These aren't reservable." He looked at me like I was the one who didn't understand. "We use it most weekends. It's taken." I gestured at my tent, already staked down. My cooler, my chair. "I can pack up if you want. Just give me 10 minutes. The shorter guy shook his head. "Nah, you're fine. Stay. No problem." The way he said it made my gut twist. Most people, if you've taken their spot, they're either angry or they let it go. These two acted like they wanted me to stay, like they were amused by the idea. "You sure?" I asked. "Positive," the tall one said. Then, after a pause, "You gonna make a fire?" "In a bit," I said, trying to sound firm, not scared. They exchanged a look, turned, and walked back to their truck. Instead of leaving, they rolled down the road 100 feet and pulled off, just far enough that I could still see their silhouette through the trees. Engine off. Lights off. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe they were locals who always used that site and just wanted me to know. Maybe they were waiting for friends. Still, it didn't feel like they were being nice. It felt more like they were daring me to stay. I built the fire anyway, because sitting in the dark with those two parked nearby felt worse. I sat in my chair, sipping coffee from my enamel mug, and tried to focus on the normal sounds of the woods. But every so often, I looked toward the road. The truck was just a shadow among shadows, but it was there. By 10 o'clock, I couldn't keep my eyes open. I doused the fire, zipped the tent shut, and crawled into my sleeping bag. Keys and phone in the corner pocket. A habit, not paranoia. At least, it felt that way then. I'd drift off, then surface when a barred owl called or the wind shook branches. The forest has a rhythm. You learn to tell which sounds are background and which aren't. Around midnight, I heard something new. Whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind dragging through leaves, but then I caught the cadence of words. Low, hushed, two different voices. They were close, right outside. My throat went dry. I kept still, ears straining. The voices moved along the side of the tent. I couldn't make out the words, only the intention. Conversation you weren't meant to hear. Then came the sound that still wakes me up sometimes. The faint metallic rasp of a zipper being tugged. My tent zipper. Slow. Just a few inches. I didn't think. I grabbed my phone in one hand and yanked the opposite zipper open with the other. The flap spilled cold night air as I shoved through and bolted. Barefoot, stones and sticks biting into my soles, I sprinted into the woods. Branches snapped against my arms. I didn't stop until I dove behind a fallen log, heart hammering, lungs burning. I crouched there, clutching the phone against my chest to keep it from lighting up. Back at the camp, the whispers had stopped. I heard shuffling. A cooler lid squeaked. Then silence. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. The night insects resumed their chorus. My breath steadied. But every time I considered creeping back, I pictured that zipper tugging open, the flap hanging loose. Finally, gray light began to seep through the trees. Dawn. Cautiously, I picked my way back. The site looked almost exactly as I'd left it. Tent still half unzipped, chair toppled, cooler closed. No sign of the men. Their truck was gone. I didn't pack. I scooped what I could into the car, left the chair and tarp, and jammed the tent, still staked, into the hatch. Then I was in the driver's seat, doors locked, gravel spitting under the tires as I sped away. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. At a gas station outside Brevard, I finally exhaled with my forehead pressed to the steering wheel. The zipper sound replayed in my head like a recording. Metal teeth parting in the dark. A week later, I went back with a buddy to retrieve what I'd left. In daylight, the site looked harmless. Just another pullout with a ring of stones. But the cooler was sitting off to the side, lid ajar, contents gone. The chair was gone too. We told a ranger, gave the short version. Call next time, he said, even if you're not sure. I haven't camped in Pisgah since. I still camp, but I do things differently. I trust my gut. I keep my keys on me, not in the tent. I don't argue with the little voice that says pack up and go, because sometimes generosity isn't generosity at all. Sometimes it's a test. And the sound of a zipper at midnight is not a test I ever want again. I turned 39 that September, and instead of cake or drinks with friends, I celebrated it the same way I've celebrated most milestones for the past few years. Quietly, alone, with a pack strapped to my shoulders and a trail beneath my boots. That year had been heavy, heavier than most. Work had drained the life out of me. Endless screens and endless calls. I'd been running on fumes, and I knew if I didn't reset, I'd burn out completely. Hiking always fixed me, or at least patched me up enough to keep moving. The woods have this rhythm that strips away the junk in your head. You walk, you breathe, you do the next simple thing. That's it. No drama, no deadlines, just you and the trail.
Granger knows that if you're a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing facility and your machinery isn't working right, you need to understand what's wrong as soon as possible.
So I picked Mount Rogers in Virginia. It's not the tallest mountain in the Appalachians, but it's wild enough, remote enough, that you feel swallowed by it. Grayson Highlands, the area just north, gets all the attention for the wild ponies and rolling balds. But I wanted the solitude. Trees thick as walls, streams you can hear before you see, and trails that feel older than you are. I left work early on a Friday, tossed my gear into the back of my car, and drove until the highway gave up to back roads. I parked in a gravel pull-off lot. The kind that looks abandoned except for the faded wooden sign pointing into the woods. I just wanted to hike a few miles in, set up camp near a stream I'd marked on my map, and spend 2 nights off the grid. No big summit goals, no crazy mileage, just time to breathe. The trail cut through open grass at first, where scrub brushed my legs and the sky still had some pink left in it. Then it ducked into spruce. The ground turned soft, needles muffling every step. It was just me, the silence, and the forest. I reached the stream with just enough light left to set up without fumbling. The water chattered over stones, shallow and clear. The spot was perfect. Flat ground, a natural windbreak, and enough dead branches nearby for a small fire. I pitched my tent, strung up my food bag, and got a fire going. Dinner was instant noodles. The sodium bomb I pretend to regret, but always crave after a hike. That's the thing about camping alone. Routine is comfort. The little steps, collecting wood, boiling water, tightening guy lines, they all anchor you. And the fire is your company. I sat cross-legged on a foam pad, eating noodles and letting the smoke soak into my jacket, watching the flames shrink and snap. The sound of the stream filled the silence the way white noise fills an apartment. By 9 o'clock, the forest had swallowed the last of the daylight. My fire sank into glowing coals. I rinsed my pot, shoved it next to my pack, and zipped into my tent. The ground felt firm but forgiving, the kind of bed you only get outside. I laid my boots just inside the vestibule, headlamp around my neck just in case, and checked my phone one last time before tucking it into the mesh pocket overhead. No signal. Out of nowhere, I woke up in the middle of the night. The fire outside was barely alive, a small glow pulsing through the tent wall. I lay there, listening to the stream and the occasional snap of a cooling branch. Then I heard it, footsteps. At first, I almost ignored it. The woods are full of noises, and your brain tries to make them fit categories you understand. But this wasn't a deer. It wasn't a raccoon. It wasn't wind. These were steps, spaced like a human. They circled. Soft tread over leaves, then a pause. Another few steps. Another pause. Like someone was tracing the perimeter of my campsite just outside the firelight's reach. I lay perfectly still, every sense straining. My hand rested on my boots, steadying them so I wouldn't knock them over if I shifted. The steps didn't hurry. They didn't stumble. They moved with a patience that told me whoever was out there knew exactly where they were putting their feet. And the strangest part? No light. No beam cutting through the dark. No flashlight bobbing with each step. I've camped enough to know the difference between a hiker who stumbled into your sight by accident and someone who is there on purpose. Lost people call out. They trip, shine their lights around, mutter to themselves. This wasn't that. The footsteps kept to the ring of faint firelight. They would scrape through leaves until the glow brushed against them, then retreat back into the dark. It felt intentional, like they knew exactly where my vision ended. I pulled my sleeping bag down just enough to free my arm and inched toward the tent zipper. Every movement sounded deafening to me, though in reality it was probably no louder than the stream. I eased the zipper a fraction, just enough to create a gap. Through that narrow slit, I saw him. A man. He stood just beyond the firelight, right at the point where the glow surrendered to darkness. He wasn't tall or short, built average, clothes dark. He didn't move. He just stood, facing my tent. No flashlight, no pack, nothing reflective. Just him, positioned perfectly at the boundary where I could see him but not see details. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My throat wouldn't allow it. He stood for maybe 20 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. And then he stepped backward, slowly, quietly, until the dark swallowed him completely. The footsteps stopped, and for me it was like the forest reset itself. But he was gone. I let the zipper slide back, closed the gap, and lay flat, eyes open, listening. My chest rose and fell too quickly, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. I didn't dare move more than that. No more steps. No more sign of him. I stayed like that until the sky above the tent shifted from black to faint gray.
Sometimes life can be a little messy. But with next-gen Nuvella Performance Fabric at Ashley, we've got your whole home.
When dawn finally arrived, I slipped out of the tent, boots laced tight, head swiveling. The campsite looked exactly as I'd left it. My food bag hung untouched. My pot leaned against a rock. The fire had collapsed into ashes. But when I walked to the spot where he had stood, the forest floor bore faint scuffs. Disturbed needles, a few leaves pressed flat. Nothing clear, but enough to tell me I hadn't dreamed him. I packed quickly, stuffing my tent without folding, tossing gear haphazardly into my pack. 2 trips to the car, each one faster than the last. On the second trip, I kept looking back, convinced I'd see him again at the tree line. I left a note at the ranger station's trail condition box, scribbling, "Strange encounter, man circling camp, no flashlight, disappeared into woods." I left my number, though I never got a call back. For weeks, my sleep was fractured. I'd wake at 3 or 4 in the morning, convinced I'd heard steps outside my apartment window. I'd stand by the glass, staring at the reflection of my own tired face, listening for a sound that never came. And I think about him. I think about the way he stood there, not speaking, not moving closer, just letting me know he was there. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was testing me, if he was curious, or if he had worse intentions but changed his mind. What I do know is this: the woods are full of sounds, but silence is its own kind of sound. And that night, the silence said more than words ever could. And when I look back, I still don't know what scared me more. That he was out there in total darkness with no flashlight at all, or that he seemed to know exactly where the firelight ended. If these camping stories prove to you that nature doesn't always mean peace, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next scare, and tell me what you'd do if it were your tent. And if you thought camping was risky, wait until you hear what happens on the Appalachian Trail. Click now to watch 4 scary Appalachian Trail horror stories. Because sometimes the trail gives you company you never asked for. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.
This new year, shop kitchen essentials at Hobby Lobby. Make your space inviting. Make it neat and
Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated with the ocean. My mom hated it. She used to tell me all the time, if God intended for us to know about the ocean, he wouldn't have put so many obstacles between us and the bottom of it. I thought that was a bit reductionist, but when I insisted on studying biological oceanography and ocean engineering, she was as supportive as she could possibly be. College was the best time in my life. I loved my studies. My mom and I even bonded over it as she let me tell her all about what I was learning about the ocean. Even though she didn't love the field I chose, she still pitched in for my education and encouraged me to live at home until I was done. She was my biggest supporter. 2 weeks after I graduated college, my dad died. And with his death, my mom seemed to lose all of her will to live. She tried to hold on for me, but every day I could see the light slipping from her eyes a little more. She died the day after my interview for my dream job, and to this day I'm convinced she did that on purpose. She knew her time was coming and she waited so I wouldn't miss my interview. My friends always tell me that's a little morbid, but when I light candles for my mom, I can feel her spirit there with me, and I know it's true. Anyway, I got the call with the job offer a few days after her funeral. Another small blessing that I knew came from her. And despite wanting to just lay down and give up on everything, I accepted the job. I was still heartbroken about losing both of my parents within a few months of each other, but the job was everything that I had dreamed and more. After a few years, I was given the opportunity to join a team that was researching previously unexplored parts of the ocean, and I got assigned to the coolest place ever, the Bermuda Triangle. I know, we all grew up hearing stories about the Bermuda Triangle, and most of them can be explained by science and weather patterns. But the stories that can't be explained by science, unfortunately, I can offer you an explanation for. Turns out my mom was right. Sometimes obstacles are there for a reason. The first few weeks of our research expedition were exciting. We had a place that we were staying in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. But since that's still a good 640 miles from our research site, we also had a fairly nice boat that we were staying on, and the team got funds for a submarine. I won't bore you with all the scientific details of our expedition, but after about 2 months, we were granted permission to send 4 people into the Bermuda Triangle in a submarine. Our team lead decided she would select 3 people to go with her, and out of our 11-person team, we knew there would be a lot of disappointed people. She said that she would give us her decision individually, to avoid the awkwardness of everyone who wasn't selected. I was a bundle of nerves for the whole week it took her to decide. But on a bright, beautiful Sunday morning, Marnie found me in my bunk and told me that I had been selected. To be honest, a part of me knew deep down that I was going to be picked. There was no way all these things would have lined up so perfectly, just for me to be left behind while somebody else went on the submarine trip. As it turns out, we would all be better off if someone else had been selected. 3 days later, we were ready to take the submarine down to the ocean floor. The people in our group were myself, Marnie, an older man named Jacob, and a guy about my age named Evan, and the 90-person crew running the submarine. We all had our hopes for what we would discover, but I think everyone was just elated to be a part of something so big.
Are you the kind of person who knows things? Things like you can get a domain from Squarespace, not just a website? Well, now you are that person, because now you definitely know you can get a domain from Squarespace. Something like whisperingbloom.com for your silent retreat, or whisperingboom.com for your shouting retreat. Whatever your dream, a Squarespace domain and website brings it to life, all in one place. Get yours before it's gone with offer code MAKEITREAL for 10% off your domain or website. Terms and conditions apply.
The first few days in the submarine were spent mostly getting our bearings, charting, mapping, and getting used to being so deep underwater. After that, we were able to use some pretty high-tech equipment that looked a lot like the suits that astronauts wear to actually leave the submarine. I still lay awake at night and think about what that was like. The ocean was dark and it reminded me of fog actually. The way that you can see up to a certain point before it all blurs into one meaningless color. Only instead of fog, we were in an inky darkness all the time. I could see a few feet in front of me at any given moment. The wonders of the ocean hidden behind a cold, wet, dark veil, all there for me and my team to uncover. After a couple of days of collecting samples and specimens, Jacob and I made a huge discovery. Caught between a rock and the ocean floor was a scuba suit, in a design that neither of us had ever seen before. Our suits, top-of-the-line equipment not currently available to the public, looked a lot like spacesuits. This one looked like a toddler had tried to copy what we were wearing, but lacked the ability to really do it any justice. The hands looked like mittens, almost exactly the way a small child would think to draw them. The helmet was oddly oblong and looked like a large bucket with holes cut out for the eyes and mouth. The eye and mouth holes were covered with glass, and the top of the helmet was rounded instead of flat like a bucket would be, giving it an odd misshapen appearance. The body was misshapen as well, with a barrel-like torso and uneven arms and legs. While I couldn't tell what the helmet was made from, it was clear that the body seemed to be made out of leather. The helmet and body almost seemed suctioned or glued together. There was no zipper, no buttons, no way I could see to dismantle it in order to put it on. More importantly, it was clear the suit was very old, but it showed none of the signs of damage that something like that should have after sitting at the bottom of the ocean for so long. Jacob and I glanced at each other, and then rushed toward the strange sight as if we were both thinking the same thing. We worked together to move the rock off it, then cleared the debris that had gathered around the suit, mostly fish bones and small carcasses. We did so in complete silence, but despite the lack of words, I knew that we were both beyond excited. Whatever this was, we were both on the cusp of an incredible discovery. We freed the strange-looking diver suit and carried it back to the submarine. An hour later, Jacob and I stood with the rest of the crew. Everyone hovered around the table that we had placed it on. We had debated for a while if we thought it would hold up, bringing it out of the water and into a strange atmosphere, and Marnie logically decided that we needed to resurface as quickly as possible, so we could get the suit to a temperature and moisture-controlled storage facility. She told the submarine captain, and he said that he would prepare us to resurface first thing on the following day. In the meantime, Marnie told us to work our butts off to get as much done as possible before departure. She told us that if the submarine went back down, she would probably give other people on the team the opportunity to be on the crew. That was disappointing, but I agreed that it was only fair. We put the suit in the storage room that we had reserved for samples, locked the door, and then went back to work. That night was when the first unusual thing occurred. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to piercing shrieks and raced out of my bunk into the hallway. One of the crew members, Rodriguez, I think, was kneeling on the floor, clutching his head and screaming. The captain knelt next to him, trying to talk over the sound of his screams, but all we could hear was Rodriguez repeating over and over, "The eyes, it's eyes." Nobody knew what that meant, but his fear was both palpable and contagious. The captain assured us that sometimes people struggle with being underwater for very long, and Rodriguez would get the best medical and psychiatric care possible once we got back to the surface. He insisted that we all go back to bed, and everyone complied, slinking off to our bunks like a bunch of chastised children. The first thing I did in the morning was go back to the captain and ask if Rodriguez was okay. The captain smiled in greeting and assured me that Rodriguez was a bit sick, but they were sure that he would be just fine. I thanked him, and as I was leaving, I heard him call out, "If God wanted us to explore the ocean, we would have gills." It was my mom's favorite joke. Every time I talked about the new advances in oceanic technology, she would say that to me with a smile and a pat on the arm. I turned around and stared at the captain. I said, "What was that?" He was already facing away from me and glanced back over his shoulder. Sorry, what?" I knew my face was tight, my voice reflecting my nerves. "What did you say? As I was walking away, you said something about exploring the ocean." He gave me a concerned look. "Are you okay, Dr. Williams?" I didn't say anything. I nodded, every muscle in my body feeling like a tense rubber band. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. I guess I was just lost in my thoughts." As I walked out, he muttered, "I can't have another crazy on my ship."
At Walden University, get the W.
With Tempo Learning, I'm in the driver's seat.
Go faster. Go slower.
What I already know and what's happening in my world sets my pace. Let's do this. Get the W. Walden University.
I made my way back to the sample room, which was once again unlocked, and I joined Marty where she stood next to the area that we had reserved just for the diving suit. Marnie had sent Evan out after Jacob and I came back to chip some pieces off the rock that had pinned the diving suit to the ocean floor, and he had also collected some bits of detritus around the area as well, like fish bones and other carcasses. I walked over and said, "Have you had a chance to crack the suit open?" Marnie smiled, knowing that I was messing around, and said, "Oh right, because I want to be the ocean version of the guy who destroyed the city of Troy." "No, but there's the craziest thing." I lifted an eyebrow and Marnie went on, "I don't think there's a body in here." I looked over at the diving suit and felt a strange pang of fear shoot through me. How did it get down there then? Marnie shrugged, unbothered. Maybe it dropped off a boat or something. We might never get an answer to that, but we can do some testing on it to see when it was made and what it's made from. I scooted away from the wetsuit, the room feeling claustrophobic now. "Have you had a chance to run any tests, or are you waiting until we resurface?" Marnie started to answer when the door opened and a sheepish-looking crew member walked in. "Doctors, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have some bad news. We aren't going to be able to resurface today after all. We're experiencing some technical issues." Marnie and I both looked at each other, mirroring the panic on each other's faces, and in her best, stern voice she said, "Define serious issues." The crew member glanced over his shoulder as if he was waiting for somebody to step in and take over for him, and then he replied, "I'll let you have that conversation with the captain. All he told me to pass along was that we're experiencing some strange weather that's interfering with the radar, and he doesn't feel safe resurfacing until it passes. He can lower us back to the ocean floor so that you can continue your research though." Marnie sighed and passed a hand over her face, looking weary. "Yeah, tell him that would be good, and please update us at your earliest convenience." She stressed the word earliest with a look on her face that always made lab assistants duck their heads and promise to do whatever she asked. The crew member was no different, and he turned to flee quickly. Before he could escape, though, I said, "Wait, what about Rodriguez? Is he going to be okay?" The crew member went pale and said, We don't know. Captain Cameron says." He stopped and squared his shoulders back. "He'll be fine. We'll get back to the surface as soon as we're able, and in the meantime, he's fine in the med bay." I let him run out then and turned to Marnie, who had already turned her own attention back to the samples. Before I could ask her thoughts on what was happening, she started giving me instructions, and I ran over to help her with the tests. If we had to be stuck underwater, we might as well be productive. While the equipment that we had on the sub was good, it wasn't the equipment that we needed to safely test the material of the suit. And so we focused on analyzing the other specimens that we took from the site instead. As we worked, it felt like the suit was the third person in the room, watching and judging silently as we worked. And Jacob and Evan joined us at some point, and the four of us made up plans for how we would use our time until the sub could resurface. Marnie was mostly frustrated that we didn't have a timeline. She wanted to map out as much time as possible, but hesitated to do that if she didn't know how much time we had. And Jacob and I encouraged her to schedule our days as if we were going to be staying for the full 5 days that we would have had left, and promised to do all her top priority items first. With that settled, we went to the mess hall for dinner. When we got there, I noticed that there seemed to be fewer people than usual. Rodriguez was missing, obviously, but I also noticed one of the female crew members I had started bonding with was gone too. I grabbed my food and sat down across from someone that I had seen talking with her before. I smiled and said, "Hey, I'm Mara Williams, one of the researchers. Do you know where Claire Mason is?" The crew member, I thought his name was Reynolds, gave me a weird look, and then shook his head, stood, and left his half-eaten tray of food where it was. I watched Reynolds walk away, feeling equal parts confused and irritated.
Are you craving warm, creamy, cheesy comfort this week? Grocery Outlet, your extreme value headquarters, has you covered with an amazing deal on Kraft macaroni and cheese. The blue box you know and love, all 7.25 ounces, are only 49 cents each. Perfect on its own or paired with...
A few minutes later, Marnie walked over and grabbed my arm. In a harsh whisper, she said, "You need to come with me." I stepped out into the hallway, feeling anxiety wringing my stomach like a dish rag. Marnie didn't say anything, but we walked down the hall until we had reached the sick bay. Once we got there, Captain Cameron stepped out with a concerned look on his face. I had last spoken with him that morning, and in that time it was as if he had aged 20 years. He waited for us to step inside, and then shut the door and said in a hushed voice, "Thank you both for coming. I'm sorry to be treating this so clandestine, but I have some concerns. I think you'll understand." He took a deep breath before continuing. "We seem to be having problems with psychosis on board. We both saw what happened with Rodriguez. In the last 24 hours, we've had 2 more crew members experience the same thing. That may not sound like a lot, but when you're on a machine like this one, you need every person to be in the best health possible." I stepped aside and we saw Rodriguez, Claire, and another crew member I thought was named Anderson, all laying in their beds. They were asleep, and they looked to be peaceful. Cameron continued, "They're sedated. Every time they wake up, they start screaming again, and we want to keep this quiet from as many people as possible. I told the crew that there's a bout of mono going around and to be cautious and stay out of the sickbay. It's not a good solution, but it's what we have right now. I need you two to see if you can figure out what's actually going on." Marnie lifted an eyebrow and put one hand on her hip. "We're not equipped for that, Captain. Neither of us have a degree in medicine or psychology. Don't you have a doctor on board?" Captain Cameron gave her a look that I can only describe as pure desperation. "Our medic isn't equipped for this either, and we don't have a psychologist for this expedition because it was supposed to be a short one. Please, just do blood tests or something. Work with our medic and use any of his equipment that you need to. Figure out what's going on." Captain Cameron left, and I turned to Marnie and said, "This all started the night after we found the diving suit. Do you think we brought some kind of bacteria into the ship that's making people sick?" Marnie winced. "I hope not, but maybe we did. I'll go take a sample from it to see if there's anything weird. You go finish your dinner." She started to leave and then stopped. "And Mara, don't speak a word of this to anyone. We want to keep this quiet. I sulked back to the mess hall, feeling like my trip of a lifetime was slowly blossoming into a nightmare. I finished my food and then went back to the sick bay to check in with Marnie. She wasn't there and the medic was back, but he hadn't seen her either. Concerned now, I went back to the storage room. Sitting on the floor in the corner of the room was Marnie, tears flooding her cheeks, her eyes looking hollow and glassy. I ran to her side. Marnie, are you okay? What's going on? She didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there like a shell of a person. I ran from the room to the sick bay and told the medic what was going on, and then I went to the control room to look for the captain. When I told him what happened to Marnie and what our suspicions were, his face grew hard. He said, "Lock the room you've got that thing in and don't let anybody touch it. If one more person gets sick, I'm making you and your team get rid of it, and I'll make you bleach the entire storage room to make sure that no one else gets sick." I apologized for all the trouble, agreed to his conditions, and left to update Evan and Jacob. I know that Marnie told me not to, but with her out of commission, I needed as much support from the rest of our team as possible. When I got to the men's bunk area, Evan and Jacob were both there looking tense. They motioned me inside and we huddled together on Jacob's bed. Jacob leaned in and whispered, "About 20 minutes after you and Marnie left, we heard more screaming. Rugen this time. He was in the hallway and near the storage room clutching his eyes and Jacob hesitated as if he wasn't sure how to explain it. He was begging for forgiveness. I don't know about what or to whom, but he kept saying, 'I didn't mean to, I'm sorry,' over and over." Evan took in a shaky breath and said, "We tried to help, but the person you were sitting with before Marnie grabbed you, I think his name is Reynolds. He pushed us away and told us not to say anything." My mind reeled. It seemed like something about the suit really was making people sick. Maybe Rugen had gone into the storage room for some reason. Or maybe an even worse thought. The bacteria on the suit that was causing this had migrated from the storage room somehow. An image popped into my head of invisible bacteria crawling along the floor, lit by a black light showing it moving in waves towards new victims. I looked up at my two teammates and said, "Cameron, Marnie, and I think the diving suit we found might have something to do with all of this. Like maybe there's some kind of bacteria on it that's causing all this. And with Marnie in the sickbay now too, I think we may be right." We all stared at each other for a long time before Jacob said, "Oh, this is bad." Evan and I nodded our agreement, and then Evan asked, "Well now, what do we do? We can't get rid of the suit. Who knows what kind of discoveries we can make with it?" And he cast his face down. "And this discovery could put all of our names on the map, you know. We could be something." And Jacob put a fatherly hand on Evan's arm. "Safety's far more important, Evan. Don't sacrifice lives to have your name on a plaque in some museum." He turned back to me and said, "I think we need to put the diving suit back in the ocean, Mara. Some things weren't meant to be found." I looked back and forth between Evan and Jacob, feeling the weight of being the tiebreaker resting on me like an anchor. Finally, I made the worst mistake of my life. I said, "I think we should try to stop whatever this is before we put the diving suit back. We came all this way and I think it's what Marnie would have wanted." I could tell that Jacob wanted to argue with me more, but when I mentioned Marnie, he closed his mouth and lowered his eyes. We agreed to meet in the storage room in an hour to try and find a way to keep the suit quarantined so that nobody else would get sick. The running theory was that some kind of bacteria was causing encephalitis, a swelling in the brain that was causing hallucinations and catatonia. We didn't have the right tools on board to properly diagnose them, but it was a good place to start. The three of us split up to look for supplies that might help. Evan left to look for cleaning supplies. I went to the med bay to get masks and gloves, and Jacob simply said that he had an idea and he ran off on his own. We had agreed to meet up outside the men's quarters again, which were thankfully on the other side of the building from the storage room. A little after 9, I rejoined Jacob in the hallway. When he saw me, he sighed and said, "Oh, I knew it. I have a bad feeling." I lifted an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He gestured around us vaguely. "Evan isn't here. I haven't seen him since we parted ways, and finding cleaning supplies shouldn't take very long." I shook my head and handed him the gloves and mask. "Throw these on and let's go check." Jacob sighed again. I had hoped to stay away from that area until we can deal with this, but all right, let's go. We walked to the storage room together, and when we got there, Jacob pulled me gently away from the door so that he could enter first. When we walked in, neither of us were surprised to see Evan laying on the floor, hands over his head, sobbing. And Jacob and I walked over and dragged Evan to his feet and carried him to the sick bay. When we got there, we found a horrible sight. Somehow in the last hour, 10 more crew members had gotten sick. We had started with a smaller crew around 90 members, 30 people per shift, 3 shifts if I remembered correctly. Since we were a smaller submarine, we didn't need as many people. We were now down to 15 people, including Marnie and Evan. We were quickly turning into a skeleton crew, and while I didn't know very much about submarines, I had a feeling that was really bad. After we dropped Evan off, Jacob and I went to find Captain Cameron. We opened the sick bay door, and before I could process what I was seeing, Jacob had pushed me to the floor and slammed the door shut. Walking down the hallway was the diving suit. It slumped and lurched as though only one part of it at a time was able to hold itself up. We watched through the port window in the door as a crew member came around the corner and ran into the diving suit. The man smirked as though he thought somebody was playing a prank on him, and looked into the eyes of the mask. His face fell, his eyes widened, and he began sobbing. I tried. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to let her drown. I was only a kid." He continued to sob, curling up into a ball on the floor as the diving suit continued to move. Jacob pulled me away from the window and placed his back to the door blocking the port. We stared at each other in silence for a long time before he said, "Okay, this is bad, and it's hard to believe." I nodded, feeling panic wrapping its cold, clammy hands around my throat. "What's happening? Is somebody in the suit?" Jacob took slow, steady breaths, and I did my best to copy him. After a few minutes, he said, I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think we can explain this." He turned and looked out the window again and took a deep breath. "We need to get back to the men's bunk. I grabbed our wetsuits, and I think that we're gonna need them." I was able to manage a small smile, and Jacob was a good person to have on my team. We made our way out of the med bay, both of us shielding our eyes with our hands to avoid looking directly at the eyes of the suit. As much as I wanted to believe there was some logical answer, it seemed like people were having breakdowns only after looking into its eyes. We moved slowly, taking small, careful steps as we walked down the hallway. We could hear more screams echoing around the ship. They seemed to be coming from the other side of the ship, which was good, but it wouldn't be hard for the creature to catch up with us. We finally got to the bunk room and Jacob threw the door open, both of us barreling inside quickly, and we collapsed to the floor in a relieved heap. Jacob was breathing heavily, his face red, and I was worried that he might have a heart attack. I found a bottle of water and I passed it to him, and then I waited for him to recover. Finally, his breathing steadied, and he nodded to me gratefully, and then pointed across the room to where 3 diving suits sat on his bunk. I rushed forward and grabbed his first and then got my own and put it on. Once we were both fully suited up, I turned to Jacob and asked, "What now?" He gave me a stern look and said, "We have to get that thing off the ship. It's too risky to try and contain it." I felt the words like a deep blow and hung my head with shame. "Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry." Jacob put his hand on my shoulder and gave me a tight smile. "We're gonna make this right. Don't worry about it too much." We both put our helmets on and stepped into the hallway. Jacob carried the body of the third diving suit. I carried the helmet, and we made our way towards the control room, hoping that Captain Cameron would still be in there. The plan was to find the captain and get the word out around the ship that the thing could only hurt you if you looked into its eyes. We still weren't entirely sure what happened if you looked at it, but what we had seen so far was disturbing enough that neither of us wanted to try. I followed Jacob through the ship as he led us away from the screams, taking a more circular route to the control room as we avoided the shambling creature. When we arrived at the control room, Captain Cameron beckoned us in with a relieved look on his face. There were 11 crew members crammed into the small control room, and once we joined them, we were officially at capacity. We handed Captain Cameron the diving suit and explained the plan. He nodded, looking grim, and then said, "Oh, that's better than risking anyone else's safety. How about I lead the creature towards the exit hatch as a distraction? You two just get over there safely and wait. Novak will watch the cameras in there and release the hatch once you three and the creature are safely inside." He gave us a pitying look. "I wish I didn't have to put you two in so much danger, but I don't see any other option." Jacob and I both nodded resolutely, and I said, "It was my decision to bring this thing on board. I want to do what I can to make it right." Jacob put his hand on my shoulder and said, "And I was involved with that decision too, and I second this one. Let's fix our mistake." Captain Cameron nodded, slipped into his diving suit, and the three of us stepped into the hallway. Jacob pointed to the right and then at Captain Cameron and nodded, and then pointed to the left and gestured for me to follow him. We made our way down the hall towards the exit hatch. It was a sealed, pressure-controlled room that we could use to come and go for specimen collections. It was also exactly big enough to hold me, Jacob, and the creature. The few crew members we passed, we warned about what was happening, and told them to hide somewhere safe and keep their heads down. I was starting to get nervous about the number of people that we had sedated in the medbay now. I don't know exactly how many people it takes to run a submarine, but with people dropping like flies, we had to be down to the wire. It wasn't long before we could hear scraping and shuffling coming down the hallway towards us. Captain Cameron rounded the corner, walking backwards with his head down. I glanced at Jacob and realized that if the thing pursued Cameron instead of us, we would never be able to get rid of it. I stepped away from the doorway and put myself between the creature and Captain Cameron. It didn't break stride, but when Cameron shuffled off to the side, it didn't change course to pursue him. I took over walking backwards until I made my way into the isolation realm. It shambled after me but didn't stop when I put my back against the wall. It kept moving towards me until it had me pinned against the exit hatch. I kept my eyes down but called out in a shrill voice laced with panic, "Jacob, it's got me pinned." Just as I finished speaking, I felt a hard slam and I glanced up just enough to see the creature reeling back, before slamming its head into my helmet again. I watched in terror as a small spider web appeared in the glass. The creature put its hands on either side of the helmet to hold me in place, just as Jacob was able to open the hatch behind us. Water rushed in and the creature was sucked out into the inky blackness. I had been able to get a good look at its hands before it was sucked out, and my stomach sank with dread. I was almost certain that the suit was stitched from human skin. Even with that fresh panic, I was thrilled and gravity and physics took care of the problem for us. And then a leathery hand reached back inside, wrapped itself around my ankle and yanked me into the cold, dark ocean. And despite our depth, I could tell the storm was raging above us. The water would briefly light up with a lightning flash, revealing the tide, battering everything in its path on the surface. I could only see the creature when the lightning would flash, but I could tell that it was trying to get back to the submarine with me in tow. I fought and kicked, trying to get away, but the grip that it had on me was inhuman, making all my struggles to get away seem meaningless. I was about to give up hope when I saw something come down in the creature's hand. Jacob had found a large rock and brought it down on the wrist part of the suit. It weakened the thing's grip just enough for me to get away, and I crawled backwards. In the momentary flashes of light, I could see Jacob fighting to get away, and I began searching for a rock too. I could see the spider web in my helmet growing, and I knew it wouldn't be very long before the pressure would break through and drown me. I found a medium-sized rock, and I fought against the water pressure to lift it. At some point, Jacob got free from the creature and helped me lift the rock, and together we carried it to where the creature was pinned by the rocks that Jacob had been able to grab, struggling to free itself. We dropped the rock on its sternum as the lightning flashed, illuminating the thing's eyes just as I looked at them. Instantly, I was transported somewhere else. It was a sunny day in November, unusually warm and bright as I walked down a hospital hallway. I was moving slowly, even though the nurses had called to tell me to hurry. I had been scared. I knew my mom was close and I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I think part of me hoped that if I never got to the room, I would never have to see her die. In a sense, I was right. I didn't have to watch her die, because she had already passed when I got to the room. The nurse said if I had only been 1 minute earlier, I might have been able to say goodbye. In the memory, I sank to my knees in the doorway of my mom's room and began weeping. I felt a hand on my shoulder and I turned around, expecting to see a doctor, but instead I found myself looking right into the face of the diving suit. When we made eye contact, I was plunged again into a memory. This time, I found myself kneeling at my dad's graveside as my mom sobbed beside me. It was the moment that I had known I would lose my mom as well, one of the most painful days of my life. Again, I felt a hand on my shoulder, but this time I looked down, and I saw the human leather glove, and I closed my eyes tight. I felt the creature turn me around, could feel its face inches from mine, but I refused to open my eyes. I could feel its rage radiating out from it as the hands moved from my shoulders to my sternum and began tearing my chest cavity open, biting through the meat of my flesh and wrapping around my bones. I could feel my rib cage bending and instinctively opened my eyes as I screamed. I was instantly plunged into another memory, this one from the time that I had dealt with a stalker in college. But this time I was ready. And as soon as I felt the creature's hand on my shoulder, I bolted. I ran through the hallways of my old college until it faced into the green and gray of the cemetery that my parents were buried in. I forced myself not to falter as I ran past my crying mother, the creature still shambling after me. The cemetery faded until it was replaced by the hospital, and I continued to run despite the burn in my chest and arms. I reminded myself that it was a dream, a hallucination, but the terror remained. After what felt like years, the hallway faded into black, and I woke up. When I woke up, I was in a regular hospital bed. Marnie was in the bed next to me, the curtain between us pulled back. Her face looked drawn and tired, older than I remembered. I took a moment to get my bearings and then I pressed the call button for a nurse. The nurse, wearing light purple scrubs, walked in and lifted her eyebrows in surprise when she saw me. She said, "My God, you're awake. This is incredible. Let me get your doctor." She rushed over and did something on the computer next to me. took my vitals, and then ran from the room. She came back a few minutes later with a doctor in tow. They fussed over me for a while and gave me a little information, but I got the real story from Captain Cameron when he had arrived. Captain Cameron, or Nate as he told me to call him, told me what had happened. He said that Jacob and I had just managed to pin the creature when I had fallen to my knees and began sobbing. Jacob had carried me back to the submarine and put me in the isolation chamber. When they opened it, I was there in catatonic, but Jacob wasn't. They weren't sure exactly what had happened to him. They think that he got grabbed by the creature, or maybe it was starting to get free and he ran back to stop it. Either way, Jacob had sacrificed his life to save mine. They hadn't been able to recover him. As soon as the creature was securely trapped, the storm had calmed and what was left of the crew had taken the submarine back to the surface. It was a difficult journey. Apparently the storm had been a rough one, and on a skeleton crew it was extra hard. Apparently by the time that we had gotten the creature off the ship, a total of 41 crewmates had been affected by it. Those of us who had been affected by the creature were taken to the hospital, and according to Nate, only a few of us woke up. I was among the first group to wake up, and even now, almost 6 years later, 8 of those people are still catatonic. And I take responsibility for every single one of them. Marnie woke up eventually, and even though she said she didn't blame me for what had happened, I was still removed from her team. That's okay though. I'm not as interested in the ocean as I used to be. It turns out, the ocean hides some secrets for a reason.
Creativity is not something I wait for. I am Antoni Sendra, a filmmaker. I'm always hunting and hustling for ideas. Adobe Creative Cloud is designed to be almost...
I tell myself every...
Okay, so the Cosmere was just picked up.
Any specific thing in that book that you would change if you had had a little more time?
The problem is time wouldn't really do it, right? Like part of the thing that gets me to revision for me works best when I have feedback and I'm like, oh, and that feedback can send me. There are a few things I would revise if I could magically have, like for instance, I think that the Blackthorn Reborn would be better as something that appears in book 6 as a mystery with the same foreshadowing for what happened here, where you pick up book 6 and you're like, wait, down there died. What is this Blackthorn thing? Right? That would have worked better if I had sliced out that little scene with Taravangian. That's probably the main one that I would revise if I had the chance. That was a pretty late edition, and so maybe if there had been like another 6 months to do another round of beta reads, somebody would have said something that sparked that for me. Though I'm not sure. I would have revised that. Knowing the feedback, I probably would have taken another pass at some of the modern language. I know that's bothering people. Just some of the things like dating instead. I didn't think it was any when I wrote it and getting the initial feedback any more so than normal for me, but I bet unconsciously my language has been drifting more modern because of writing Skyward and some of the future Cosmere stuff like Sunlit Man, and because that I've been drifting more modern kind of unconsciously. And so knowing that that's a stumbling block for some readers, I definitely would have looked at that and be like, all right, where am I going too modern in some of the language? So I would revise that. Is there anything else I would revise? I might, I think I said this on Reddit, I might have brought out a little bit more of Yasna's trauma in her sequence. I just don't want to get into that too much because I need it for the back five. And once again, if I do too much early on, then it ruins story arcs for later on. Yeah. And so you can tell, very delicate with talking about Yasna's trauma and who she is and her flashback sequence and things like that. Because if I talk too much about it, then we have a Venli problem where we get to the book where the flashback sequence and you already know all the stuff. And so the flashbacks just aren't as interesting because they don't have the kind of mystery reveal along with the kind of character arc stuff. And they just don't hit as powerfully. So, but I might have brought out the trauma a little bit more because that really helps explain what's going on with Yasna. So yeah, there's 3 for you. There are always these subtle things, these subtle tweaks, right? That after the fact, like with Words of Radiance, when I'm like, oh, I bet it would work better if I did it this way, and things like that. But art is never finished; it's only abandoned. All right. The famous quote goes, you know, I wonder if Lucas hadn't ruined it for us, if going through and doing a kind of director's cut revision after 30 years would be a thing that people liked, but we're also wary of it. And I did that experiment with Words of Radiance. I'm like, no, I don't like this. Like, people don't know what is canon and what isn't. It's too confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. Actually, going off you mentioning the Blackthorn, how are you thinking about like balancing this idea of like the Blackthorn continuing to exist or like existing again with the risk of undercutting the meaning or significance of death in the Cosmere? Like, right, we should think of Dalinar as being dead now, right? It's not Dalinar.
Blackthorn is not Dalinar, and it'll be very quickly obvious what I'm planning to do with him. If I were you, and again, I don't want to get too many spoilers. This is about a book. If I were you, I wouldn't worry too much about the Blackthorn's place in the story. The Blackthorn has some very specific things I'm planning to have done, and I think when it's all said and done, you will not have had to worry about that. Blackthorn's not Dalinar. Any more than 2 twins are the same person.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense, and even more in a lot of ways divided off. The Blackthorn is an idea. This Blackthorn is a spren, and not a person, and lets me do some things. But again, would have been stronger, I think, if you just saw this mysterious thing show up in book 6, and you're like, wait, what? Because then you would see the implications and what I do with it at the same time. So yeah. Oh well.
Okay.
No, that's totally fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah, don't try the Blackthorns. We don't say to the fans.
Kind of keeping like in a similar theme with, branching paths and decision making. One of my favorite things when you talk about kind of your processes, when you hit those big decision points where you're like, okay, I could go down this path or I could go down this path, and one of those that you've talked about is whether you wanted Taravangian to become Odium or whether you wanted Raze to stick around as the villain.
Yes.
And we know that Raze always had this kind of prohibition in his mind against picking up a second char. Because he did not want to risk kind of adulterating himself. He wanted to be just of Odium. And we see now that kind of the way that this book resolved sort of required Retribution to form. If Raze had remained Odium, would Retribution have been the direction you've gone, or would he have done something else?
He would have done something else.
Okay. Can you elaborate at all? Or
let's theorize on that. What would have happened? Let's just say Raze remaining Odium was always, how should I say? It wasn't always. It very quickly became the underdog of what I would do as I wrote Taravangian more and more. Be aware that Taravangian in Way of King's Prime, the character in that role, didn't work as well as new Taravangian. I felt like the old Taravangian was too gimmick. I can't remember what I called him. Was too gimmick, too little actual character. And the option to keep Raze around was really there in case Taravangian didn't develop the way I wanted him to. But he did. And the other thing that I was checking for was a mood check of has Odium lost his bite now that he tried to convert Dalinar and he tried to convert Kaladin? And the answer that I came up with was yes. Dalinar effectively defeated Raids in Oathbringer, and then in Rhythm of War, Kaladin put the nail in that coffin. And his ideology, his way of being, had been summarily rejected by the heroes to the point that he was just not a threat. And someone who wasn't willing to take the other shards could not be a threat on the level that I needed him to be. And so that option disappeared quickly, shall we say, by the time Oathbringer was happening. But it was an option. It was an option as I was writing Rhythm of War that I could have gone with.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe there would have been some more splintering going on. Who can say what would go on? What would be happening there? All right, I think back to Rosemary now.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of people were disappointed when Cultivation just yeeted herself off Roshar and fled.
Yep.
Is what happened what she expected to happen, or was this like her plan C, her plan F, plan C? Like,
so
how many layers were there?
Cultivation does have more plans, but let's just say, if Cultivation were as capable of handling Odium as she thought, we wouldn't need a book series.
Oh my!
And that's one thing to keep in mind, right? If Honor and Cultivation can handle Rays, could handle Odium, really the power behind Rays, Stormlight Archive wouldn't need to be written. And so I wouldn't count Cultivation out entirely, but I would say that Cultivation is part of the problem, not the solution. And that's how you should be looking at Cultivation. I mean, there's some good reasons that that some members of the Heralds did not get along with her. And you know, this is one of the problems I run into in writing this book series is I want the viewpoint characters to be the ones that are solving problems, not necessarily the people who we can't really grasp and understand. And so from the get-go, Cultivation, I would, as I said, I consider Cultivation, you know, she's part of the solution, but I also consider part of the problem. So there you are. I'll leave you with that. You are very much allowed to be disappointed in her, and you should be.
It's good to know. Going a little bit more meta, I guess. So you have talked before about like having a big talk with us after Wind and Truth, because it's like this big capstone to this arc of Stormlight and even like the entire Cosmere in some sense. Has this actually already happened? Because you had this gloves off moment after Lost Metal. Okay.
Sorry, Marvin, I cut you off. Go keep on going.
Yeah, no, so because you had this gloves off moment after Lost Metal, like was that moment, or do you still plan to talk to us about it?
No, I mean, I can talk about it here. Part of it is a little bit of not an apology, but a fake apology. I knew that I had to pretend is the wrong term. So I've known all along that book 5 was a cliffhanger and a bit of a downer, right? I couldn't talk about it that way during book 1 because otherwise everyone knows what book 5 is. So I had to talk about book 5 as the end of arc 1 and era 1. As I was talking about it, I realized about, several years in, people are assuming it to be the end of an arc in the way that an anime arc is the end of an anime arc. Not the way that, it's not even really Empire Strikes Back, right? It is the end of an arc in that we ambiguously lost and kind of won, mostly lost. Everything fell apart. Book 5 is the Stormlight Archive unravels, not the triumphant conclusion. You can see the problem that I have knowing that, my model for book 5 was Final Fantasy VI, the midpoint where the world ends. And you guys played Final Fantasy VI? World ends halfway through Final Fantasy VI. Right? It was more that, and then being like, then we're going to do 5 books in a post-apocalyptic Roshar. And knowing that and not understanding, so that, what is the big talk? The big talk is, on one hand, I'm sorry that I couldn't prepare you for this. Usually I'm pretty good at preparing my fan base for what's coming. When I split a book, when a book delays, when, you need to brace yourself for something. And I couldn't do that for book 5. And not being able to do that for book 5 was a little hard. And so, I am sorry about that. It is the right artistic choice, but that's kind of what the big talk is about, is this idea of, I didn't intentionally mislead you, but I realized as I was talking about the book, I couldn't say as much as I'm used to saying. And this goes back 10 years, right? Or longer. And I knew people were expecting more of like an era 1 of Mistborn end and then a soft reboot, not the world completely falls apart and everybody is left in a terrible situation. And I even pulled back on that. I think I've talked about this before. The editor just like, Tor, like, you can't release this book, Brandon. You can't release this book. It's too sad. And some nods toward that were giving the Sion to Shalon so that she could contact Adolin. Because I knew by book 6 that would have happened. So I'm like, all right, I can do it now. And to take the edge off just a little bit there, there's 2 Hoyt epilogues. One of those was written to try to take the edge off a little bit, if that makes sense. Just to, but the book's supposed to be a kick to the face. And if we don't have the kick to the face, then the Stormlight Archive as a series doesn't work. As I have planned that arc, and it's rough because I couldn't prepare anyone for it. And I told Peter, I'm like, so this book's gonna come out. This is the point. If I'm ever gonna have a point where my career could collapse, it is this book. It is like, I know what fans want, and I did not give it to them. And this is the first time in my career that I just didn't give it to them. You could argue that I didn't give you Kaladin's oath at the end of Oathbringer, but I just delayed that and gave it to you in book 4. In this book, I just said no. As I sat down around, I'm not giving them what they want, and I know what they want. And that's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard, both for me and for them. And the real trick and the kind of punch is, I've never done this before. So my artistic instincts say this is what's right, and I'm going with them. I could be wrong, right? This could be the thing that in 20 years, I'm like, oh man, I should have just written another book that has the same emotional arc as books 1, 2, and 3, rather than taking books 4 and 5 and changing it up so much. And maybe we'll do this interview and be like, well, I was the biggest selling fantasy author in the world, and then I refused to give readers what they wanted, selfishly and arrogantly, and I really should have just done it. But we'll see. What I've always been saying is, we will know if this book is a success in 7 or 8 years, not in 7 or 8 weeks like we've known with all the other books. And I'm sure you guys have had, I don't listen to the podcast, but I'm sure you've had plenty of discussions about that idea and whether that's a good idea and why it aggravates readers, and the parts of this that aggravate readers and the parts of this that disappoint readers, and things like that. So we'll see if my artistic inclinations are correct. when you interview me in 7 or 8 years.
If it makes you feel any better, there's a small subset of the fandom that thinks it should have been darker at the end.
Yeah. I'm actually one of those, but I recognize that I just couldn't do it. Right. If I didn't have a 6 to 8 year gap between, maybe I could have, right? Like David, if I had a new Stormlight book already secretly written and coming out in a year, then I could have probably gone even darker with that end. Right. I could have sucked a little more hope out of things, but I just couldn't. Not with the 6 to 8 years. There needs to be kind of this tonal promise that there is still light and we're still gonna find it. But yeah. But that's at least what my gut said. So I do know that there's a subset of that, and it's not necessarily even the darkness that I think is going to be controversial. I think fans do like books to go dark now and then. It's the reading a Sanderson book and not actually knowing where the pacing is going, where the plot lines are going, what you're supposed to expect. When you read one of my books, if you are a close reader, which I assume most of your audience is, I put in all of this kind of tonal foreshadowing that tells you what kind of ending you're supposed to expect. And you can feel this book start to swell and hit there in the Sanderledge. And you're like, I've been reading all this time expecting this thing and Sanderson's going to deliver, and I do. And sometimes what I deliver is different, but I always foreshadow that, whether it's going to be some bittersweet, whether it's going to be triumphant, whether it's going to have a lot of world building, or if it's just going to be action. These are all things that I'm foreshadowing and building to that Sanderledge. And this book, like I would, again, I don't know. I don't know what people are actually saying, but my assumption is that the response is to be like, no, it's not the darkness. The publishers are just wrong. The publishers are scared because dark is not marketable. And they're wrong. Dark is very marketable. Right? They look at things in the wrong lens. The thing is the not knowing where it's going. Those cues being odd and a little off. The darkness being like a kind of darkness where you're like, rather than, oh no, they're in a terrible spot, but they'll pull through, right? Like it's less darkness that's the problem. Well, it's not a problem. It's what I wrote into the book, and more of a, I no longer know what this series is, and I don't know if I love it anymore. Right? That's the dangerous thing that I'm writing into it. Like I said, I think in a post at some point, when a symphony goes atonal all of a sudden, unexpectedly, and it's like nails on the chalkboard. I'm looking for a little bit of that with this book, and that's super dangerous and maybe stupid. So that's what the conversation is. I did that intentionally. We'll see if it's the right idea.
It's definitely provided some fertile podcasting topics for us. So
I would too.
It's been good.
Definitely lots of stuff to talk about with this one.
Oh, heck yeah. Another question, another sort of meta question. We were just wondering, how are things going with the Ghost Bloods? Like, having a good time? Is there anything that's kind of particularly exciting or challenging about kind of returning to this world since Wax and Wayne was unplanned, and now you're coming back to something that you've had in your mind for a while?
Man, it's been so nice to have had Wax and Wayne. A lot of the stuff that I did in Wax and Wayne is stuff that in this book I would have had to do as setup, which has made this book streamlined a lot better. We don't have to delve as much into these things. If you want to find out, if you want to read them, they're in the Wax and Wayne books. If you don't want to read the Wax and Wayne books, then I think this book will still work. But having it there just as this 4-book basically history to make this all happen means that I don't have to set up the Cold War. I don't have to set up the bands of mourning and the strife over those. I don't have to set up. I don't have to there's so many things I don't have to do. That as I'm writing this book, I'm like, oh, I covered that already. I don't have to do that. and it's making the write of the book just a lot easier. My biggest concern with it right now is everybody wants this to be a new entry point to Mistborn, right? And I find it clunky to re-explain in these characters' viewpoints key ideas from the Mistborn series. And I don't know how well it's going to work for new readers, right? I don't want to delve into what is allomancy, what is feruchemy, and kind of the 101 level stuff. And so I'm going to have to see how that flies with initial readers. But it doesn't feel natural in the flow of the text. And maybe I'll find a place to make it natural in the flow of the text. And, for marketing purposes, everyone, Tor and everyone wants this to be Ghostbloods Book 1, not Mistborn Book 8, right? But it's Mistborn Book 8. I've been writing in this world for a long time. I'm very comfortable with things. And, it's more fun for me to have, for instance, a Lurcher character doing cool things with their powers than it is for me to re-explain how allomancy works. It's more like, let's show some mist things you haven't seen before and see what they can do. And that's fun. So I'm writing it that way, and we'll see if I need to do any revisions.
That totally makes sense. Do they generally view Wax and Wayne as an entry point, or not so much?
So here's the problem, David. And again, this is something I did pretty eyes open. Tom Doherty came to me, the CEO of Tor, founder, CEO of Tor. Came to me after I killed Vin and Ellen. And he said, Brandon, you can't do this before the book came out. If you do this, then there is no series. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to jump forward 300 years and I'm going to write something else. He's like, no one will read that. And I'm like, yeah, but it's the story I'm telling, and to an extent he is right? Like Mistborn ends, and lost half the readership for Wax and Wayne, I guess. And, that still means they sell pretty well because Mistborn's one of the best-selling books of all time. But there's a huge fall-off. Those things terrify publishers, where I'm like, yeah, there's a huge fall-off, but suddenly it's a Western instead of a fantasy. It has a different audience, and only a subset of the audience is going to want to jump to that. It's okay. I'm writing this book for them. The others, they can. There's lots of great fantasy books for them to read, right? Like, not every book has to be for everyone, and it's okay for readers to pick up Wax and be like, yeah, detective stuff, not my thing. It's a tone shift, too much of one. Not a problem with that, right? Like, I think the Wax and Wayne books are stronger written. They get there. Owl Live Law's a little sketchy, but they're stronger written. Particularly the 1-2 punch of Shao's Self and Bands of Mourning, as the two strongest, I think, Mistborn books by actual writing. I think Mistborn 1 is just still the most appealing. It has the best premise, right? And things like that. So I think they're fantastic books. But at the same time, and they're fantasy westerns, except they're not westerns. They're taking place in a city, so they're fantasy detective novels starring a western character who's in the Mistborn world. They're weird. So the publisher's just never been behind Wax and Wayne. And now I'm doing it again. And in their mind, we're going to lose half our audience again, right? And that's, terrifying to them. That you might lose half your audience a second time, and then he's going to do it again and again. I think we have lost who we're going to lose. And I think some people might pick up Mistborn. Urban fantasy appeals to more people. Ghostbloods, urban fantasy appeals to more people than Weird Western does. But this is the piece of art, right? This is what I'm writing. This is the fun. Mistborn will stand a test of time better because I'm doing these weird things. Same thing kind of with Wind and Truth, right? Like doing weird stuff can be disastrous, but when it works, you end up with things that stand the test of time. And a lot of the weird things like this the initial reception is people are really uncertain, and they're right to be really uncertain. But then it works over time. That's why I say 7 or 8 years will tell. We'll tell if this is if that's the case, and we'll see with I think Wax and Wayne and Ghostbloods is kind of the same thing. Over a long period of time, does the fact that I have these powerful artistic inclinations to do something different, is it going to make it stand out, or is it just going to be weird? Ghostbloods, I guess circling back, this is going really well. It's just a blast to write in the Mistborn world. It's my favorite, just kind of setting to write in because it is fun to just the way that the 32 powers kind of crunch together in different ways is really engaging and interesting, and you can do quirky things with them. So,
well, that makes me really excited to see what you've got planned. It's always fun to see what comes up with Twinborn or the power combinations.
Yep.
We're going to move on to some of our more, these won't be quite as in-depth questions, but it'll be a little more scattershot. But I think still a little Stormlight dominant, I would say.
Potentially digging into Raffo bait too.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone loves that.
Yeah.
All right. So, Wind and Truth ends with the postlude to the Stormlight Archive.
Yes.
What prelude does Stormlight 6 begin with?
So prelude is Stormlight 6. I'm calling it the Voidlight Archive, but I know it's not. It's technically like Warlight or something like that. But in my head all along, it's been the Stormlight Archive and the Voidlight Archive. That's not a title that will be on Book 6. Book 6 will not be Book 1 of the Voidlight Archive. But internally, I've always viewed them as the Stormlight Archive and the Voidlight Archive.
Interesting.
Yeah, Peter hates this. Peter's like, this is just confusing, Brandon. Why? What are you doing? But I'm like, I got a prelude to Storm. I'm like, I got a postlude, and then we'll have a prelude to the Voidlight Archive and a postlude to the Voidlight Archive. And it works. And he's like, but it'll be Book 6 of the Stormlight Archive. Like, yeah, that's a series name. So we'll see if they let me get away with it. Meaning, kind of the editors, beta readers, when they see that, they're just like, this is too weird, Brandon. But that's what I named the 2 5-book arcs in my head. Because we don't have Stormlight anymore. So.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah. It is technically.
All right. This comes from the staff of the Coppermind, because there's been some discussion about this already. So in the spiritual realm visions, we meet a man by the name of Elodie. Is this the modern day Elodie, like as he was in his pre-fused form, or is this somebody else?
Raffo.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. The spiritual realm visions, we meet a man by the name of Elodie. Is this the modern day Elodie, like as he was in his pre-fused form, or is this somebody else?
Raffo.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Hi, Future Argent here. You may have noticed I'm not in the interview, but I decided to join in anyway. The word of Brandon you just heard about Elle and Elodie has already been superseded. Independently of this interview, I had reached out to Karen Ostrom, the wiki timeline lady of Dragonsteel, and had asked the same question because I don't think we would get to it in the interview because it was this specific and targeted. And she did in fact confirm that Elle and Elodie are different people. So there you have it. Back to you guys.
Another one I've got for you. So one kind of conflict that featured one character kind of dynamic that featured a little more heavily in the early books was the realization that Kaladin and Shallan have independently that Kaladin has killed Helaron. That's, kind of a very big deal, but it's not something that the characters have ever really gotten around to discussing, at least on screen. And so is there a reason that you feel like they weren't ready to get to that? And is it something you kind of foresee that they'll ever get to, or is that not kind of an angle you're interested in exploring?
I still have on my list of things that we could get to, but this is character stuff. And so I don't force it. And part of the reason I haven't forced it is Shallan doesn't confront problems, and Kaladin has been breaking. And it's just like, another thing, right? To deal with, and I don't think either of them want to deal with it. Will they? Keep in mind, like these sort of things I try to treat very naturally, like people do. And sometimes you just don't talk about it. Sometimes you do. It'd be good for them to talk about it. Will it happen? It's really going to depend on if I find the right situation that it feels like the characters would do it. And this is where Brandon the outliner goes out the window and Brandon the write it by the vibe comes in. This is just one of those things that's kind of looming over them, and they both kind of know it.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, so Town tried to kill cultivation for unknown reasons with a weapon he got from Calic. How close did he get to killing? With a weapon he got from Calic. How close did he get to killing her, and what sort of weapon was this?
You think I'm going to answer that?
We are obviously fishing for whether or not Town got his hands on a Dawn shard.
Wait for Talon's flashbacks. Maybe I'll answer then. Maybe I won't.
We are hoping you will.
Bravo. I'm glad you asked it. Bravo.
Moving on, so Hoyt claims that like that Retribution's ascension was pretty unlikely to happen, and like basically didn't see it happening. But we see some other characters like Molar in the Death Rattle sort of predicting it. Renarin sees it happening basically. Does this mean that Hoyt is just worse at seeing the future than he thinks he is? Or
well, yes, he definitely is worse at seeing the future than he thinks he is. But also the future is finicky, and things like that. So yes, Hoyt's very good at getting where he needs to be. He is much worse at actually reading the future, and you'll see this with him. There are other points where you can see this with him. He's very good at play acting, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Another one we have, this is going back to Way of Kings, so this is going to stretch back a little ways. According to the epigraphs in the Way of Kings, the Pollennium is suggested to not be the first iteration of this library. It's mentioned that there was a firing of the original Pollennium. Some of our close readers are wondering, is this related to the hierarchy and Vornism's desire to get rid of historical records, like the Knights Radiant and the Voidbringers, or is it related to something else?
I'm gonna raffle that for now.
Okay, that's fair. We'll continue to debate.
So, in one of Zest's flashbacks, he's seen praying to a stone, which gives him the impression it's foreign to Roshar. And I'm going to read a couple of descriptions.
Okay.
Brilliant stone, 2 feet across with a crystal vein running through the center. It opened at one side like a mouth, the crystal forming teeth, wind and truth. Then, at the direct middle of the circular pattern, the crystals curved inward, following a pocket like hollow in the wall. Here, the crystals grew long, each one having a jagged, sharp edge, like teeth lining the maw of stone beast from the Final Empire. So the descriptions bear a striking resemblance to each other. Is Zeth praying to an ATM crystal?
Excellent question.
No, Jesse's going to be so disappointed that got it right.
Yeah.
Oh, that was Jesse's.
Yes, that was Jesse's.
I'm sorry, Jesse.
So in the same sort of vein with talking about Atium, did any god metals exist prior to the shattering, like either associated with Adonalsium or one that would become associated with the shard or something else like that?
Yeah, I'm going to raffle this one now, Marvin, but I can talk about why on this case. Basically, I do have a god metal designed for Adonalsium, and I do not know if it will work when I write those books. This is one of those things that I'm like, I don't know if I want to go right. Like, and so we will see if I do or don't, right? Like a lot of that stuff from Yolen's a little up in the air till I write Dragonsteel Prime, because there's been so many iterations, right? Like, or not Dragon. So when I write actual Dragonsteel, like in Dragonsteel Prime, we've had the weapons designed, and at various points, even in Dragonsteel Prime's chronology, I had either Father God dead or not dead yet, and that the weapons have been locked away. You're right, and so, but then there's children gods in Dragonsteel Prime that I, abandoned, and so I'm staying away from that one. If it's relevant, it'll be relevant in Dragonsteel.
Okay.
And very quickly on. Right now there is, but it's very loosely tacked to the board.
I mean, we kind of want to figure out what the fourth moon might be made of. So like maybe, but okay, that's it. Good indicator at least already.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see if we can round off like a god metal Raffo trio here or not. So I'll rephrase this a little bit to maybe try to get it at something that you can answer.
Okay.
Braze's core has an interesting metal as well.
It does.
Would you consider this metal to be a god metal or no?
So I would not consider it to be a god metal.
Okay. But and that would have been something that would have been set up when Adonalsium created the system.
This was not placed there by any of the shards.
Okay.
Of Adonalsium. So would I call it a god metal? This is where we get into it, right? Like, what do we consider a god metal? And things like this. It is not a god metal of one of the 16 shards. There you go.
That's an excellent. That is excellent.
That's I would not consider it a god metal of one of the 16 charts. It was not placed there by one of the 16 charts.
We love to do what is here. So if you want to answer what is a god metal, we'd be happy to run through it.
It depends. Like right now, what is a god metal? Right now, I call the god metals the essences of the 16. Right. But god metal is a term that like kind of developed naturally in the community, right? It's not really like a thing that the early in-world characters could even really define. And so there's something wonky about the moon, and bits of it hit the planet. So, there's maybe some myths and stories on Roshar that you might have heard that have something to do with this. And some of those, all of those stories mean something. So there you are.
All right, so this next question we got, this is one that's been bugging me for a while.
Okay.
You've said many times that Cell is one of the most difficult planets to get to in the Cosmere. And yet, there are a whole lot of Cellish world hoppers running around. Is the planet just easier to leave than it is to get to? Or is there something else going on here?
So, there is a specific way that you can get on and off. And if you know the people who run that, you can get on and off.
Okay.
If you're going to try to do it on your own, you're going to get destroyed. Almost certainly. Not completely certainly. So difficulty inspires people to make solutions. How about that?
Okay.
You can't just wander over to Cell and get onto Cell very easily. But if you know how, like, it's a lot easier for me to get to California than to New York. But I go to New York more often.
Okay.
And sort of continuing on that, what we already touched on the fourth moon, just to like set some ground rules. Any question we ask about, will you automatically RAFO it or?
Probably
Okay.
not automatically. You see me trying to give you some stuff, but it's hard, right?
Yeah.
Giving stuff causes people to have a worse time later on.
Yeah.
Reading books.
I try anyway. Did Adenalcium make it fall to Rosha, or
did Adenalcium what?
Was Adenalcium the one who made it fall to Rosha, or like?
Okay, we'll raffle that. Yeah, okay. I'm glad you're asking. Yeah, we'll raffle that.
Sure.
Okay, that's fair. We got to save some stuff for us to read in 5 to 8 years. So we learned in Sunlit Man that a spike can be made from a previous holder of a Dawn Shard and then used to find the next Dawn Shard holder in the chain. And I always kind of figured that was how they were tracking Sigil in Sunlit Man, the Night Brigade. But we see now that he got his Dawn Shard from Hoyd, and we know Hoyd was most likely not killed and had a spike made out of him. So are they using a different method to follow him?
So you don't have to kill people to make spikes anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Be aware of that. That's one of the big revelations that we had. And by that era, it's making spikes is a different experience. I'll point that out. If you can get a piece of, for instance, you could make a spike using some of Hoyd's breath that he's held long enough. You just need to get the right attunement. But there are other ways to chase the Dawn Shard. Just like there are lots of ways. So there are other ways to chase the Dawn Shard as well.
Okay. Good to know.
So Calic comments that Shallan is able to draw on fortune because she has 2 Nahel bonds. Is this truly what's going on, or is it instead because she's the daughter of a herald, or is it maybe a mixture of both?
Yeah, definitely some mixture going on there and some unique resonances going on with Shallan. I would say that anyone who's trying to theorize in world about what's going on with Shallan, they don't, it's a pretty unique case and they are spitballing maybe poorly. Whether it's Hoyd or anyone else. Weird stuff's going on with Shallan's spirit web and it's causing all sorts of fun for me. So, Jesse, you are correct. There is definitely a mixture there, and you are not getting the whole story.
All right. So I have a question about the history of Rosha, because we learn a lot in the visions that they visit, like we have from thousands of years ago. But we still do not know what year 0 in the Warren calendar is. Can you share with us what event they are counting their years from?
Yeah, I'm gonna raffle that, but not because because I don't want to get it wrong.
Okay,
it's into those.
Fair.
And that's a. Am I remembering right? Is this what it is, or did I change it 3 times?
Okay.
We actually had the missport I was doing. So my company had the 20th anniversary of Elantris party today, and part of trivia, which I didn't participate in because it would have been unfair. But there's at least one question where I answered wrong, I didn't participate like on one of the teams, but I was answering myself because I had changed it. I'm like, oh right, I changed his name. Serene's cousin was Mayben in my head, but I changed it to something like Aiden. I changed it to an actual Aeon focus name, but his name is Mayben in my head, and it has been. And I'm like, oh, like I remember that I changed Galadon's name because I've used him a bunch since, but I didn't remember I changed his name. So, changed things, and mine still is on the way it was for 5 drafts, not the way it was for 1 draft. I get myself into trouble sometimes. I've mostly stopped saying Silver Eye, but.
Have you caught yourself writing Silver Eye in Ghostbloods yet, or?
No,
Okay.
that one I've basically I've fixed, but I caught a new one today. Mayben is no longer Mayben, and he hasn't been for 20 years. But in my head, he's Mayben, and I'm like, I'm going to write Mayben's book someday, and he's not even named that. So.
Cool. Okay.
And so one of my favorite moments in Stormlight 5 was the interlude with Kuzakesh, where we see the Iriali leave, which was a really kind of cool way to tie back to Way of Kings, I thought. But one of the things that we were curious about with Kuzakesh, it seems like he's serving as a guide to wherever they're going next, maybe Lumar, maybe somewhere else. And is he the guide for just this leg of their journey, or was he with them when they came to Rishar and he is kind of leading them on?
So he is the guide for this leg of their journey, but he is not actually a spread.
Not actually a spread. Okay. I guess Axis gets them wrong sometimes. Okay.
What's that?
I said, I guess Axis gets some things wrong sometimes.
Axis, yep. Axis would have to categorize him correctly as a spread adjacent entity, which is how he's categorized Sions when he's met them.
All right. So is the dragon Hoyd dated and the vessel Hoyd dated the same person?
Yes.
So is it Valor?
It's Valor. But that's a spoiler. I give you guys spoilers. So there's your big spoiler. Yes.
That was That was one of those things where we're pretty sure, but
yeah, it's the same. So yeah. So
All right. So I've got another question right here. It's a little more of a general one. I'm sure it's an odd feeling to have an audience of this size. How do you react when people tell you things like, oh, I named a pet after one of your characters, or couples say, we met because of your books? Because we've got, this question was submitted by 2 of our mods who ended up getting together through the fandom, Aeon Een and Luther and Telescope, whose name you might recognize.
Hey! So yeah, that's pretty awesome, right? Like, I, in a way, got married because of my books also. Because Isaac took my class and introduced me to Emily. And so if I weren't a writer, I wouldn't have met Emily. I like making connections, if you can believe it. That is one of the coolest things. It is a little weird to meet the kids. Like, my niece, who lives next door to us, she's 6, she's going to kindergarten. She came home and she was talking about her friend Kaladin in her class. Like, she just knows a Kaladin that a baby, toddler, preschooler, kindergartner, Kaladin that I've never met. Just like, they're out there in the world. Kaladin is the weird one. Weird that it's become a real name. Like, if you look at the only one that ranks on the name registry as being, a common name and things like that. So that's a little odd. When they start going to high school and I meet Kaladin, the high school student, that's going to be extra weird. Then I'll start to feel my age even more at that point.
Yeah, you're gonna have Kaladin's going, you really put me through it at Oathbringer. I don't know. Awesome.
So sort of closing us out here on the questions. First of all, we're very grateful for being able to ask all these questions and you not giving us answers, not just even if there were some ruffles, we are very grateful even to have those. And we know there are a lot of other people in the community, of course, having burning post-Win and Truth questions. Are streams or specifically spoiler streams still in the cards, or is this something that's
they're
just...
still in the cards. It's just... it's been a busy patch. When I have my class, it's hard to find the time, and then holidays and things like that. I think we'll probably still do one. Maybe like we've traditionally done one in June or July. So they are one of the hardest things I do. I talk about, like it's like doing complex mental calculations live on stream, knowing that if they give the wrong answer, I could be hating life for years as I try to correct the mistake. And so they are very difficult. And so they're not one of the things I look forward to the most, but I do know that people really like them. And it's one of the few times that people get to do that because I do signings so infrequently now. So I do want to make it happen. It is one of those things that you should do, but the things you want to do happen instead. Like I'll stream Hades. I like that. So yeah, it
was a great stream.
Stress avoidance. I'm familiar.
So I do want to get that for you guys. Not necessarily specifically you, but the people that Marvin is asking for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I have to see my old friend Luce there in Telescope. I haven't chatted with him via stream in a long time. So.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is going to do it for us and our questions today. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. And of course, thank you so much, Brandon, for taking the time and being here with us. Yeah, it's not just, people becoming couples. Like you've really brought so many people together and have created so many special friendships here in 17 Shard and elsewhere. So we're just always really grateful for you and for your books.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to see 17 Shard thriving. And I'm super happy for the Coppermind, which is easier to search than my internal wiki. And so when I just need a quick answer, I go to the Coppermind. If it's, what did I call this type of power again? Oh, right. Yeah.
Well, that is very exciting. And I know that the Coppermind editors will really appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Brandon. And we'll see y'all next time.
Take care.
Bye. Bye. Call.